Soon the day of the siege arrived and hundreds of silhouettes of gargoyles appeared in the sky among the black clouds. The sky turned black due to the monsters approaching them. Before the siege began, Ash called a meeting, which was attended by 2 of his troops. He said that since everyone is here, they are starting. He pointed to the board where the fort was drawn and said that first, they would go over the basic strategy of the battle. Currently, one of the soldiers beat a drum and warned the others that the monsters were coming. Ash and Lucas looked at the black sky and the monsters that were flying towards them. In this wave, there should be 360 level 15 stone gargoyles, 242 level 20 steel gargoyles, and 2 unknown bosses. Ash smiled and told the monsters that he was waiting for them. Lucas looked around and said that it looked like it was going to rain. It could affect the battle. As soon as he said this, thunder rumbled in the sky, and he said that he did not think this was good news. Ash replied that it didn't matter. Whether it's rain or snow, it doesn't matter. He thought that killing monsters and protecting people, their mission and purpose would not change. He decided to address the soldiers and loudly told them to listen to him. The soldiers' gaze immediately turned to him, and he confidently shouted that he would be brief. They would kill these creatures, celebrate, and calmly go to bed. The joyful cries of the soldiers were heard on the wall of the fort, and then Ash raised his hand and ordered them to prepare. The soldiers pushed the cannons closer to the walls and aimed them at the monsters. The cannons on the upper and lower walls were already ready. All that remained was to give the order. Ash suddenly waved his hand and ordered them to open fire. Immediately after this, the soldiers lit the fuse and the cannonballs flew forward with a roar. The commander of the Silver Army duplicated Ash's orders on the lower wall, telling the soldiers to open fire. The cannons on the lower wall joined the upper ones and also began to shoot. Cannon shells along with ballista arrows simultaneously flew into the sky directly towards the monsters. As soon as the shells collided with them, bright explosions and flashes appeared in the sky, accompanied by a roar. Soon the roar died down and the guns stopped working. All the soldiers looked at the raging flames in the sky mixed with black smoke and began to wait. One of the soldiers who was looking through the telescope lowered his hands in shock, looking at the sky, and then warned the others that their attacks had no effect. From the bright flames and black smoke, silhouettes of gargoyles appeared, continuing to advance despite the recent shelling. Ash ordered the soldiers to stay in line. Don't let them worry about it. They just need to keep shooting. He ordered them to continue shooting, and after that the cannons opened fire again and bright flashes of flame appeared in the sky, holding back the gargoyles. At a meeting to discuss strategy, Lucas asked His Highness, "Is he talking about the death zone?" Ash confirmed his words and he asked, "But aren't the monsters gargoyles this time? They can fly after all." Ash said he was right. Walls and barricades will not work. There is no way to create a death zone on the ground. He drew several lines with chalk on the board leading from the walls to the sky, and confidently said that they would make this zone right in the sky. The members of the main squad were very surprised, and he said that they would endlessly shoot from cannons and ballistas to create a huge network and wall of shells and fire in the sky. Of course, gargoyles are magical creatures made of stones and steel and have great resistance to physical attacks. No matter how strong their firewall is, it will not be easy to kill them with this. He took the red chalk and began to write something on the board, saying that they would give them the direction the center of the defensive line. After they make the fire curtain here weaker, this place will become a killing zone. Remembering their strategy, Ash ordered the soldiers to maintain a wall of fire. They continued to reload their cannons and fire again, and Ash thought that at first the soldiers were stunned by the enemy's resilience, but they soon calmed down. If you give them a clear goal, the soldiers will not flinch. Let them just shoot. The roar of cannon fire was heard again, and explosions appeared in the sky again. A storm of gunpowder and metal circled in the sky endlessly and began to push back the enemy forces. Due to the endless shots, the gargoyles simply remained in one place and could not fly further. That's what Ash was counting on. It doesn't matter if they damage them or not. Pushing them back with volleys is definitely a win-win plan. While continuous fire was being fired at the monsters, the turret also started working, firing several shells at once. The bodies of the gargoyles began to crack, and then completely broke into several parts with the next shot, They eventually achieved their first kills. Seeing that the gargoyles began to die, Ash happily clenched his hand into a fist and thought that high resistance does not mean complete invulnerability. Albeit little by little, the damage accumulates. It is very small, but it is not at all insignificant. On the system window, the number of kills began to grow. The plan was working. The cannons continued to work together with the ballistas, causing damage to the enemies, and one of the soldiers shouted that they were pushing them back. Ash shouted that was great. Let them keep shooting. They need to maintain a fire curtain. The soldiers obeyed the order and continued to shoot. The roar from the cannon salvos still did not subside. Dodging the shots, the army of gargoyles, chaotically surrounding them on the left and right, eventually lined up in one line. There was only one small gap left. They began to cluster near the center of the wall, where there were relatively few shots fired. Ash smiled and told the stupid monsters to continue. At a recent meeting, Lucas looked at the diagram that Ash had drawn on the board and said that he understood that they were pulling them to one place in this way. But how is he going to kill them later? Madame Jupiter will not be able to participate. Will they be able to defeat them in some other way? Ash replied that, of course, this is not entirely reliable, but there is still a way. He can't say more. They understand exactly how gargoyles fly, right? Damien raised his hand and asked, isn't it using wings? Ash replied that such bulky bodies of stones could not be lifted using wings alone. Damien asked, so using magic? Ash confirmed his words and drew on the board with green chalk the places on the gargoyle's body where magic is located, and said that wind magic was cast on their wings. Next question. What happens if two magical powers of the same element collide? Godhand raised his hand and Lily, seeing this, immediately raised hers and looked at him displeased. Ash said that the elder mage might have the answer. She said with a satisfied smile that magic of a higher level will absorb that of a lower level. Ash replied that that was correct. So, if you shoot them with higher level wind magic, what will happen? In the present, Ash called out to Lily and ordered her to act now. Having heard the order from the prince, she ordered the wind artifact to be activated. They activated the wind artifact and reported it, and after that, wind streams began to emanate around the huge green sphere. The rest of the artifacts also activated and sent streams of wind towards the monsters. An R-rank wind artifact does not have any special effect. It simply shoots powerful wind magic at the target. And that's all they need. During the meeting, Ash added the finishing touches to the gargoyle drawing and said that this was it. If they shoot them with higher level wind magic, the wind magic on the wings will dissipate and they will lose the ability to fly. Everything happened as Ash said at the meeting. As soon as the magic of the artifacts collided with the wings of the gargoyle, they froze in the air and the monster looked at them in bewilderment. Immediately after this, all the gargoyles began to fall down. These fools are very heavy. They are made of stones and steel. If they fall from a flight height to the ground, they will not survive. As soon as the stone and steel gargoyles fell to the ground, they broke and scattered into several parts. A curtain of fire continued to burn in the air, among which there were now wind currents that knocked monsters out of the sky. If they set their sights on the flanks, they will be attacked by artillery, and if they fly towards the center, they will fall. Ash concentrated and thought that now they will see their reaction. Monsters have a certain behavior pattern. Use the shortest path to kill the nearest person. Before they become unable to fly, they will begin to use acceleration to crush the nearest target under their weight. The gargoyles tried to break through to the wall, but they were shot down by cannonballs along with wind currents, and Ash shouted that this was the end. They had nowhere to retreat. He called out to Lily and asked how long the artifacts would last. She looked at the pocket watch she was holding in her hand and replied that the first one still had 20 seconds left. Ash said they shouldn't waste another second. Have her activate the second artifact as soon as the first one ends. She replied that she understood, and then fixed her gaze on the clock hand, and as soon as the hand reached the desired second, she ordered the second artifact to be activated right now. After that, she reported that the artifact was activated. The second artifact, connecting with the remnants of the power of the first, instantly shot out with a strong wind. Most of the gargoyles fell under the influence of magic, but some reached the walls of the fort. One of these gargoyles landed with a crash on the wall, creating a shock wave that threw the soldier and the cannon aside. The other gargoyle, meanwhile, was climbing the wall, digging in its claws. The soldier who was nearby warned the others that they were already here, but he himself did not notice how a gargoyle appeared behind him. The black shadow of the monster covered his head, and noticing this, he turned around in shock and saw the wide-open mouth of a gargoyle screaming loudly. When monsters appeared on the walls, Evangelina and Lucas began to act. They immediately rushed to the aid of the soldier and, hitting the gargoyle with their feet and weapons, pushed it to the very edge and threw the monster off the wall. Lucas told Evangeline that he was leaving the right side to her. She turned to him and answered with a confident smile that she could clear both of them without any problems. The cannons continued to fire. Now all Crossroads soldiers are involved in maintaining the firewall. Ash, meanwhile, called out to Damien and asked if he was ready. He confidently confirmed his words and then squeezed the gun tighter in his hands and said that he would do everything in his power. Repelling the remaining enemies is the concern of the main squad. Ash took out his magic wand and, summoning the blades behind him, said that this was great. He ordered them to act. The first defensive detachment enters the battle. Lucas and Evangelina held off the monsters from different sides, protecting Ash and Damien, who were in the center. Evangelina fought with 2 gargoyles at the same time. She pierced the chest of one with a spear and protected herself from the blow of the second monster with a shield. Damien fired in her direction, and the bullet flew forward with lightning speed, leaving a huge hole in the monster's body. He looked at the monsters with a confident gaze, and his eyes sparkled as he used the ability. Lucas, meanwhile, swung his sword, killing the gargoyle behind him, and Ash pierced the ones in the air in front of him with his blade. As soon as the last gargoyle's body disintegrated, Lucas stopped and informed Ash that the first squad had been destroyed. Ash, who was already out of breath, told the others not to relax. This is just the beginning. The gargoyles split into 6 large squads. So far they had only destroyed about 100 gargoyles, which were only the first part of the monster army. The second stage began. The gargoyles again broke through the firewall towards the fort, and Lucas reported that the second detachment was on the way. The gargoyles headed for the walls of the fort, and those who could not fly climbed the wall, clinging on with their claws. Ash noticed this and waved his wand, spinning the blade and pointing it towards the wall. The blade cut the fingers of the gargoyle that was climbing up, and it could not hold on and began to fall down. As soon as the monster's body reached the ground, it immediately broke into several parts. Ash walked to the very edge of the wall and looked down, saying it was beautiful. He thought that he had actually been training alone for a bit. Due to the class debuff, he had a hard time, because the skills progressed quite slowly. He trained by cutting celery with blades in the kitchen and still achieved better control in battle. Ash looked at the bright flashes in the sky and thought that if they continued like this, they would easily deal with everyone. Lily called out to him and informed him that the duration of the second wind artifact was coming to an end. He looked in her direction and thought, so soon? Time flies too fast. He replied that she would need to turn on the third immediately. She obeyed the order, and then, after the second artifact expired, she immediately activated the third, and streams of wind were directed at the monsters. During the meeting, Ash drew 3 wind artifacts on the board and said that this time 3 wind artifacts were placed on the castle wall. But there is one problem. He turned to Lily and asked how long each such artifact works and recharges. She replied that the operating time of each artifact was 5 minutes, and the recharge time was 15. He smiled and replied that this was true. This is the very drawback of the operation that he spoke about. He turned back to the board and said that the first artifact would block the airspace for 5 minutes, after which it would take 15 minutes to recharge. Even taking into account that all the following artifacts will also work for 5 minutes, there is still a gap of 5 minutes until the next activation of the first one. A whole 5 minutes. Within 5 minutes, they will have to control the sky, otherwise they will be able to break through. At the moment, Lily informed Ash that there was a minute left before the wind artifact was deactivated. He looked at the sky again and thought that they would have 5 minutes until the next activation of the artifact. Will they be able to hold out? Several gargoyles made their way to the wall again, and the soldiers shouted that they were advancing, They needed to quickly run away from here. The gargoyles approached the wall and landed, breaking the cannons. Ash gritted his teeth with a displeased look when he saw this, and then he clenched his hand into a fist and mentally told himself to pull himself together. Whether they can hold out is the wrong question. They must hold out. He will do anything for this. That is why he is here. He turned to his squad and told them all to get ready. Lucas became nervous and said that as soon as the artifact is deactivated, monsters will pour here. Maybe they should signal to open fire on this area? Ash disagreed and said that this would weaken the position on both flanks. They will only give the monsters the opportunity to break through in this way. Guns and ballistas are not suitable for close combat. Let them remain the guiding point. He clapped his hands and told them to get ready. The real battle will begin in 5 minutes. He hopes that the experience of previous battles has tempered them enough so that they can easily withstand the battle with the gargoyles. However, in real combat, there are too many variables. Anything can happen. He took out his magic wand and said that, therefore, finally, before the final battle, he would slap them once on the hand. Having uttered the last words, he confidently raised his wand up, and everyone else remained silent. After a short pause, Lucas asked with a strange expression on his face, did he hear correctly? Ash, who was embarrassed by this himself, repeated that he was going to slap them all once on the hand. He thought it was all because of the Maestro's wand effect. It was time to use the random buff effect. And to get it, he will have to hit the team members. How could he explain to them this strange mechanism of action of the wand? In the end, he decided not to explain anything. He walked up to the first victim, Lucas, and hurriedly said that they didn't have much time. So he and everyone else had to put their hands out, palms up. Lucas was upset, but still listened to him and extended his palms, asking, did he do something wrong? He will accept any punishment, even if he just explains what he did wrong. Ash hit him sharply on the arm and ordered him to stop talking. He would understand everything later. From his blow, Lucas lost 1 health unit, and the system reported that the character received an advanced buff. Mana consumption was halved for 3 minutes. Feeling new sensations that spread throughout his body from the hand, Lucas looked at his hands in surprise and opened his mouth in surprise, and then called out to the prince. He asked, what is it? Lucas happily said that from now on he asks to be beaten more often. Ash agreed hesitantly, and then Evangeline said they looked like they were perverted. She extended her hand to the prince and asked, it seems like something good happens after the blow, right? Ash hit her on the arm and, calling her Miss Academy graduate, said that she was very smart. After the blow, Evangelina gasped in displeasure and said that it burned. The system reported that a low-level buff had been received. Defense increased by 10% for 3 minutes. Feeling an improvement, she looked with a smile at her hand clenched into a fist and asked, this is it, so how? Ash asked, she can feel it, right? She unclenched her hand and replied that it was much better this way. Just next time, let him hit better not on the hand, but in a place that will not be useful in battle. He raised his magic wand and with a sly smile asked, that's how it is. Where should he hit her next time? Evangelina made a face with disgust and fear, looking at the wand, and covered herself with her shield. After thinking about what he had just said, Ash realized that the question sounded strange. Evangelina stammered and exclaimed, why is he asking her about this? Let him think and decide for himself. Ash agreed, and then it was Damien's turn. He stretched his trembling hands forward and asked if he could not hit him too hard. Ash noticed how his body was trembling with fear and thought, what is he doing? It seems like he spent his childhood in an orphanage. He said that it was a terrible place. He probably has bad memories of corporal punishment. He hit him on the arm and thought that he was sorry, but he needed this buff. The system reported that a high-level buff had been received, unlimited stamina for 3 minutes. Feeling the surge of power after the blow, Damien looked at his hands in surprise and called out to the prince. He asked, what is it? Damien happily clenched his hands into fists and said that he felt like he could do anything. Ash smiled and thought it was wonderful. Let him enjoy this feeling to the fullest, because in 3 minutes it will disappear. After that, he looked at the wand in his hand and thought that everything seemed to go smoothly. The advanced attachment is now completely ready. He turned towards the artifacts and, waving his wand, called out to Lily with a smile and asked, "How about one hit?" Lily remained silent, looking at him with a nervous expression, and he said that he didn't think that was necessary. She looked at her watch and reported that the artifact was deactivated. Hearing this, Ash immediately turned towards the monsters and saw the wind streams dissipate and the monsters soar in the sky. Lily shouted that they were advancing. When all the wind currents completely disappeared, the gargoyles began to break forward. The third stage has arrived. The third squad of gargoyles enters the battle. About half crashed under the influence of artifacts, leaving only 50 monsters. 50 gargoyles against 5 people. For defense in an RPG, that's not much. Ash untied the bandage on his left hand and told the others that they had 5 minutes to change the world. He thought he still felt stiffness in his left hand, but feeling was gradually returning. He took off the bandage and 3 magical blades appeared above his head, and he looked at the monsters to be so close to the walls of the fort. He smiled confidently and told the others to get going. They needed to have some fun. Everyone else obeyed the order and prepared for battle, encountering 50 gargoyles. Looking at the sky, Ash thought that the third stage had arrived, and with it the third squad had arrived, leaving about 50 monsters. The gargoyles landed on the wall of the fort, but Ash remained standing in place and thought that they were much higher in level than those in the previous squads. He concentrated with the thought that they had nothing to worry about, they had an advantage. A magical aura appeared around his magic wand, and he thought that if things got really bad, he could use his trump cards and kill with them, as he did in his third battle with monsters. He waved his hand sharply, guiding the blades, and told the monster to fly. While he was wielding his magic wand, Lucas joined him and cut the bodies of 3 monsters at once in one jerk. Seeing this, Ash thought that things were going well. The 3 team members he buffed fought as if they were monsters themselves. After Lucas dealt with the gargoyles, he turned to His Highness and asked if he was okay. Suddenly, he noticed movement to the side and reported that the gargoyles had broken through to the left flank. He will go and deal with them. He abruptly jumped out of his seat, and Ash didn't even have time to respond. Lucas used his second dash skill and accelerated, and Ash, seeing the bright flash that he left behind him, thought that he was like a rocket. This skill consumes a lot of mana, but thanks to the buff, Lucas often uses it heavily. He dealt with the gargoyles on the left flank, and then rushed back and dealt with the monsters so that they were on the right. Ash watched him move quickly and thought he was both here and there. He quickly shook his head, trying to follow him, and thought in surprise that he was an amazing character. However, this has always been the case in the game. Evangelina, meanwhile, used a battle cry, and starting to insult the monsters, shouted that she was here. The monsters immediately targeted her and roared loudly. They rushed to the attack and began to strike with their weapons, but Evangelina covered herself with a shield, and then she waved her hand, throwing their weapons aside and screamed loudly. After watching her, Ash thought that the buff made her strong and indestructible, like a rock. While this couple was cutting up the bulk of the gargoyles, the third member of the squad was mercilessly shooting at those who had broken through. The magic rifle is a powerful weapon. It has high recoil, which is quite difficult for a fragile shooter to resist. This is why, despite his excellent sniper skills, Damien cannot fight in the thick of the enemy. Damien continued to shoot. He took aim with one eye closed, and then he gripped the barrel of the gun tightly with his left hand and fired. The recoil threw the weapon upward, but he quickly dealt with it. After observing him, Ash thought that for 3 minutes, the buff gave him the ability to fire continuously without having to worry about much recoil. Since the impact on Damien's health is offset by the buff, they have a tireless machine. He needs to work on his stamina. He's too tough with it. He looked down at the magic wand and thought that this thing was much more useful than he expected. In the game, buffs appear randomly and last only 1 turn, so there is nothing special about them that cheats. In the same reality, his item gives a 3-minute buff. But if these 3 minutes can affect the course of the game so much, then it exceeds all his expectations. If he hadn't tried it, he wouldn't have realized the true value of it. They only have to destroy a few monsters, and the third squad will be defeated. Lucas at this time was fighting 3 gargoyles at once, and, swinging his sword, he struck at all of them. Ash used his wand and pointed the blade to the side. calling out to Lucas. The blade stuck into the floor next to the turret, and then Ash pointed his finger at it and told Lucas to lure the gargoyles over there. He obeyed the order, and after that Ash approached Lily, saying that it was time for her to get back to work. She clenched her teeth and looked at him displeasedly, asking why he remembered her. He said with a smile that she understood everything correctly. Before casting a spell, let him hit her once. He was about to hit her with his magic wand, but she grabbed his hand and trembled with fear, asking why. Ash did not answer the question and hit her, after which a scream was heard. Lucas, meanwhile, ran up to the blade, and the gargoyles were flying behind him, and he told the prince that he had brought them. Ash praised him, and after that he pointed his finger towards the monsters and told Lily that it was her exit now. Let it hit that way. She pursed her lips and closed her eyes, clearly not wanting to do this. Then she suddenly raised her hand to the sky and a powerful fireball appeared above her, and she exclaimed, "Why doesn't he just let her resign?" Ash was surprised and nervous when he saw the fireball and thought it looked creepy. What buff did she get? She extended both her hands towards the monsters, sending a fireball, and told them to die. She used her first fire cannon skill. Immediately after that, a powerful stream of fire was shot at the monsters, which did not give them a chance to survive. They immediately burned to the ground. After the attack, Ash turned his gaze to Lily and, looking at her tired appearance, thought that a real fire mage was in action. She had used up all her mana in one go. It was impressive. After this, Evangelina, using the provocation skill, gathered all the remaining gargoyles together. She smiled and asked, "Are they already tired of playing with their older sister?" Ash thought, "Is she the older one?" Damien exchanged his rifle for a gun called a woodpecker and asked Evangeline to raise his shield up. Immediately after that, he fired and several fiery bullets flew towards her, and she raised her shield. When the bullets hit her, they were reflected and scattered to the sides, hitting all the monsters around her. Ash was surprised and said that this was unthinkable. Was he calculating the trajectory of the bullets? He hit everyone with one shot. Seeing the result of his actions, Damien smiled and said that he hit them. Ash thought that considering the sniper skills he had demonstrated so far, he could pull it off. Evangelina, meanwhile, looked up with a smile at the last monster and finally pierced him with a spear, causing fragments of his body to fly apart. Thus, the last gargoyle from the third detachment was defeated and the third stage ended. Afterward, she told Damien it was amazing. Maybe next time they should do the same. Ash smiled and said that it turned out much easier than he expected. They all did a great job. They're great. Hearing the praise, they smiled proudly. Lucas scratched his nose. Evangeline raised her head, and Damien sheepishly scratched the back of his head. Lily shouted that the artifact was fully charged. Streams of wind began to gather around the artifact, and Lily, who still had not moved away from the attack, stuttered and said that the artifact was ready to be activated. Ash thought she looked exhausted, but she had good news. He ordered them to turn on the artifact, and she said that it was activated. A magic circle appeared in front of the artifact, from which streams of wind immediately poured into the sky. Damien called out to His Highness and said that the cartridges were almost out. He replied that it was understandable. The fourth stage has begun. He looked at the sky, which was still filled with a wall of fire and silhouettes of gargoyles, thinking that the third stage was easier than he thought. But it was too early to rejoice. Damien's Black Queen and Hunter's Retribution rifles had completely used up their ammunition, as did his woodpecker. Lucas's sword is worn out, and Evangeline's shield is damaged. As for Lily, she hasn't even come to her senses yet. But he still has a couple of trump cards left. The members of the core team have completed the task. They can now go their separate ways to recuperate. He summoned a shadow troop, and the elves in black cloaks immediately appeared in front of him and knelt down, saying that they were ready for orders. Ash said they are changing. Now it's their turn to hold off the monsters, just like the main team did. If necessary, he will join. Godhand replied that he could rest. They would do their best. Evangelina became interested and said with a smile that she would finally see the Icky's squad in action with her own eyes. Lucas remained silent and thought about something. Lily, meanwhile, watched the 5 elves heading towards the edge of the wall. She frowned and pursed her lips, clenching her hand into a fist with hatred, but still remained silent. Damien felt that something was wrong and asked what this atmosphere was. Ash thought that he seemed to sense tension between the two squads. Damien looked up at him and asked with a smile, "Shouldn't he know that?" Ash crossed his arms over his chest and, looking at the Shadow Squad with a smile, confirmed his words. Let him just deal with it for now. He thought that he planned to continue using the new team. There is nothing strange in the fact that some kind of rivalry arose between the participants. On the contrary, it would be strange if they found a common language from the very beginning. The Shadow Squad continued to approach the edge of the wall, and a gargoyle that had recently climbed the wall suddenly appeared on the fence. Having climbed the wall and noticing people, the monster growled loudly. Ash smiled and mentally ordered the Shadow Squad to act. Let them show what they are capable of. Godhand and the others stopped when they saw the monster, and then he crouched down and raised his hand to the remains of the steel gargoyle, beginning to use his magic. While he was casting his spell, he told the squad members that they were moving into battle formation in front of large monsters. Ash thought that the composition of the additional Shadow Squad was rather controversial. 2 mages, 3 archers. In a game, he would never use such a combination. This composition will exceed the combat power. Without a tank and a healer, such a combination will quickly lead to defeat. But when Godhand sat down and began to use his magic on the remains of the gargoyle, he thought that if their 2 magicians were defenders and not contact fighters, then everything could work out. After using magic, an iron wall began to line up in front of them, which soon completely acquired its shape, and several more of the same ones grew next to it. Ash thought that if they had the ability to provide support to their allies, then this combination became acceptable. Moreover, in such a composition they have an exorbitant buff obtained due to such a combination. Due to the fact that there are 2 magicians in the squad, the magical damage inflicted by team members is increased by 20%. Due to the fact that there are 3 archers in the team, the critical damage dealt by team members is increased by 30%. Moreover, they are pumped-up warriors. It will not be difficult for them to destroy the enemy with their firepower. Godhand, meanwhile, called out to Bodybag and said that her task was to restrain the enemy and indicate the target. She stood in front of him and replied that she understood. Godhand turned his gaze to the side, looking at the others, and said that the other 3 should shoot. Old Girl and Skull obeyed and ran forward, while Burnout remained in place and set down the box with her ballista. Skull stood in the desired position and took aim with his bow, and Old Girl took out a crossbow with a gun. Burnout, meanwhile, collected the ballista and placed it in front of her. This ballista contained about 100 arrows. One of the gargoyles screamed loudly, calling on the others to attack, and they all ran together towards the iron walls. Burnout's ballista fired and hundreds of arrows flew straight at the monsters. But they immediately took a defensive stance and the arrows began to fly off their bodies. Noticing this, Godhand said that apparently they could not be defeated with ordinary arrows. It gives permission to use skills. Skull at medium range, Old Girl at short range, and let Burnout take the maximum radius. All 3 ranged fighters responded that permission to use skills had been accepted. Wind currents appeared around the tip of Skull's arrow, and then he shot and the arrow flew forward over the iron wall. One of the gargoyles noticed this arrow, but did not have time to dodge, and it pierced the monster right in the head. From this blow, the gargoyle's head broke into pieces and the fragments scattered to the sides. Ash said he was a good sniper. He hit him right in the head. He thought, that's why his call sign is Skull. Old Girl, meanwhile, jumped onto the iron wall, and then jumped off and rushed towards the monsters, saying that now she will see how strong these guys are. One of the monsters noticed her and immediately swung his weapon, and then attacked, but she quickly fell to the ground and slid right under its hand. When she was behind the monster, she turned around and jumped back, aiming 2 crossbows at the gargoyle. She took aim and then fired, and 2 arrows, shrouded in green energy, rushed forward. Several arrows pierced the gargoyle's back and the monster's body began to crack, but did not crumble. She said they were very strong. She had no arrows left. She decided to retreat and called out to Burnout, asking her to cover her. Burnout heard her request and activated the ballista, and then asked her to duck as she fired. The arrows on the ballista lit up with a bright light, and then rushed forward at great speed and, overcoming the iron wall, fell in a hail on the monsters, and they froze and raised their heads, looking at it. As soon as the arrows reached the target, they immediately exploded and the monsters screamed loudly in pain. Ash thought that Burnout had a passive skill. It gives the projectiles fired explosive magical properties. For this reason, he immediately paid attention to her. It's great for hunting monsters. The arrows continued to explode and 2 surviving gargoyles flew out of the flames. Suddenly one of them froze in the air and, trying to move from its place, it let out a bewildered roar. Bodybag, who delayed the monster using telekinesis, told it to slow down for now. After that, she used another form of telekinesis and pushed the monster outside the wall. The other gargoyle, meanwhile, threateningly put its hand with sharp claws forward and growled, looking at Godhand. As soon as the monster struck, he moved to the side and dodged, and then touched the gargoyle's body and used his ability. The monster that had just stood on its feet was already lying on the floor, and its body had crumbled. Seeing this, Ash thought that the gargoyles were just pebbles in the hands of a god. 4 gargoyles destroyed in one fell swoop. Damien, who was watching them next to Ash, asked, "Are these guys considered just archers?" It's amazing. If he also improves his sniper skills, he will be even more useful to His Highness. Ash told him that there are no half measures when fighting monsters. Everyone makes a certain contribution. He smiled and added that he was irreplaceable. He has already done a lot. Don't let him worry. Damien looked at the prince with a grateful smile, and he thought that he still wouldn't be able to get the same shooting skills. It would be better if he found use for the ones he already had. As a result, the Shadow Squad coped with the defense much better than he thought. Thanks to this, by the time the 3rd wind artifact was activated, they managed to destroy the 5th squad of gargoyles. He became wary and thought that until now everything had gone smoothly. The wind artifacts continued to work, the cannons continued to fire, and the Shadow Squad dealt with the gargoyles that climbed the walls. A system window appeared in front of Ash. He thought that information about the bosses had been updated. Stylish gargoyles of level 20 remained 40, 202 were killed. Stone gargoyles of level 15 remained 58, killed 302. The boss of the wave became known, 2 leaders of gargoyles of level 35. Ash thought, what the hell? He looked at the sky and thought that this indicator only updated after the boss appeared on the battlefield. He looked around and thought that they were nowhere to be seen. But somewhere in the sky, meanwhile, a sound was heard due to a rapid descent. Hearing this made Ash nervous. He thought that this couldn't be true. Gritting his teeth, he sharply raised his head to the sky and saw there a huge leader of the gargoyles on a pedestal, flying straight towards the wall. Ash cursed loudly and warned everyone else that it was upstairs. Everyone get ready, the boss is approaching from above. Having heard the warning, the elves from the Shadow Squad raised their heads to the sky, but it was too late. The monster immediately landed on the wall with such force that all the elves were thrown back and the fragments of the pedestal scattered to the sides from the impact. Some of the debris hit Burnout and Skull directly on the heads, and they were seriously injured. Old Girl, who remained intact, looked at the thick cloud of dust through which the silhouette of the monster was visible. The gargoyle's clawed paw hit the ground, creating new cracks in the floor. The red eyes that peered through the slits of the mask sparkled. The leader of the Legion of Gargoyles with 4 arms, in each of which he held a weapon, shouted loudly. Ash became worried and said that this was the leader of the gargoyles. Old Girl was still nearby. She looked at the tall monster in front of her with fear in her eyes and, taking aim with her crossbow, said that it was huge. She fired, and as soon as the arrows collided with the monster's horns, they were immediately reflected. This only angered the leader of the gargoyles. He waved his weapon, a flail, and a huge ball covered with spikes hit the elf. She was wounded, blood began to flow from her temple, and she was thrown to the side. Lucas became very worried and asked them to hold on. They were already coming. But Ash stopped him and, looking around, said that there should be another one. Lucas turned around and exclaimed, "What?" Ash thought that this time, due to the dark event, there are 2 bosses in the game. This means there is another one somewhere nearby. Not far from the fiery wall, A black silhouette of the leader of a legion of gargoyles appeared in the sky, but Ash did not notice it. He carefully looked for every shadow in the sky and thought, where is he? What is he waiting for? But when he finally noticed a gargoyle flying towards the wall, it was too late. The monster fell straight onto the artifacts. He swore loudly, and then shouted Lily's name and ordered her to get out of there. Lily looked with a worried look and asked in confusion what he was talking about. At the same moment, a gargoyle fell onto the wall, breaking the wind artifacts. The roar of breaking artifacts and pedestals was heard. From the gargoyle hitting the wall, Lily's wheelchair was thrown up along with her, and she, with horror in her eyes, looked at the red-eyed monster that had already swung its weapon. Then there was a sound of impact. The wooden wheelchair broke along with the pocket watch, and Lily herself found herself directly under the spiked ball. But suddenly something confused the monster. Ash got excited and thought this is it. At the moment of impact, Lily's fiery skin skill was activated and the spiked ball passed through her fiery body and hit the wall. Ash thought that thank God, thanks to her passive skill, she wasn't hurt. Seeing that she was still alive, the monster swung his other hand and Ash thought that even Lily could not repel the magical attack. He called out to Bodybag and, pointing in Lily's direction, said her name. Bodybag replied that she understood. She immediately turned towards Lily and extended her hand forward using telekinesis. She pulled Lily towards her and thus pulled her out from under the blow, which a second later happened behind her back. Lily screamed loudly in fear as she flew forward, and Ash called out to Godhand and ordered him to catch her. Godhand immediately stood in the line where Lily was flying and shouted that he was holding her. A second later, Lily collided with him and he caught her, and she looked into his eyes in surprise. He let her go and sat her down, asking if she was okay. She hastened to turn away from him and embarrassedly replied that she was perfectly fine. He remained silent, and Ash at that time called out to Bodybag and told her to take care of her fighters for now. She replied that everything would be done, and then began to move her wounded comrades using telekinesis. Ash turned to the main team and said that it was their turn. Everyone get ready for battle. Lucas, Evangelina, and Damien, who had already had time to rest, went into battle with renewed vigor. Ash looked at the two bosses and thought that boss monsters behaved a little differently from normal gargoyles. They are much smarter and much more evil. First of all, they eliminate the most dangerous opponents for them. For this reason, archers and artifacts were the first to come under insidious attack. Even now, on the walls of the fortress, they will try to destroy not tanks, but those who cause the most damage, including him. They would definitely try to kill him, a weak but important commander on the battlefield. Lucas told His Highness that having two bosses is definitely a huge problem. But what should they do with the remaining gargoyles? Ash turned his attention to the sky and thought that the sixth wave of the Legion of Gargoyles had arrived, the last, sixth detachment. It was not difficult for them to break through the defenses, since the wind artifacts were completely destroyed. The center had nothing left to defend. He replied that he knew how to deal with the sixth squad of gargoyles. Let them leave it to him. Without a moment's hesitation, Lucas answered with a confident look that he understood. Ash thought it was instant, unconditional submission. He trusted him so much. Godhand called to His Highness and said that he had brought Miss Lily out. Ash praised him and told Lily that she would have to take the case personally. What about the rest of the artifacts? Can she run them? She confirmed his words and said that, as he had asked, she had placed them in different places so that they could be used even in the most extreme case. From the very beginning, spare artifacts were installed in various places just in case. Fortunately, their alchemists managed to move to another place and acted remotely. Thanks to this, they managed to avoid losses. Ash slapped his hand on his chest and told her to start activating immediately. The artifact is a magical amplifier. The target is him. Lily replied that she understood, but her legs weren't moving. She can't walk. Ash turned to Godhand and asked him to take Lily to the artifacts. Lily became very worried and, glancing briefly at the elf, exclaimed, "Is it him again?" Ash sternly replied that now was not the time for her whims. There is a war going on. Let her pull herself together. Hearing the commander's stern tone, she immediately apologized to him. Godhand took her in his arms, and she covered her face in embarrassment. Ash told them to go to the artifacts immediately. They don't have time. Having finished with them, he turned to Lucas and Evangelina, saying that they needed to hold out until the artifact was activated. Lucas clenched his hand into a fist and confidently said that he could leave it to him. 1 hour, even more. He will win them at least all 12 hours. Evangelina smiled confidently and said that she thought they would finish them all off by then. Ash walked up to Lucas and put his hand on his shoulder, saying that the leader of the gargoyles was a very strong opponent. It is not like those they fought before. Let them be vigilant and not weaken their defense for a second. Did they understand it? They both replied that they understood, and then Ash told them to get started. Lucas and Evangelina immediately ran towards the bosses, ready to fight. Ash asked Damien how much ammo he had left. He looked at the gun and said that if each Cerberus has 6 rounds, then there are 18 rounds in total. Ash asked if this was enough for him. Damien remained silent and used his ability, looking at the enemy. After that, he replied that the armor and helmets of the gargoyles are a serious problem. They seem to have magical protection. Ash replied that it was. He thought that the gargoyle leaders wore armor with magical protection, and their bodies also had high physical durability. They'll have to take an unconventional approach to get to the clean armor. After a physical attack destroys the magic armor, the boss can be hit with magic. But it's easier said than done. It will still take time. Naturally, the bosses will not stand quietly aside and wait for them. Cerberus is a magical weapon in the form of a pistol, but its range is lower than that of other magical weapons, and Damien himself is not suited for close combat. First, he needs to start rebuilding the team. He called out to Bodybag, who was sitting nearby, and asked what the condition of the fighters was. 3 wounded elves lay in front of her. She answered the prince that most had injuries of varying degrees of severity. The weapon is also damaged. Hearing this, Ash turned to Damien again and told him to start providing first aid to the Shadow Squad. He obeyed the order, and Ash noticed that he perked up when he heard that he would be able to work as a healer. He's so predictable. He turned back to Bodybag and told her that while Damien healed her comrades, she should look for weapons for them. He would need their firepower. The clouds in the sky became even blacker. Thunder was heard. The first drops fell on the wall with a barely perceptible thud. The rain intensified. The entire fort was covered with downpour, and noise began to be heard. Ash looked at the sky and stretched his hand forward, catching a few drops with the thought that even the weather was against them today. It was simply incredible. The leaders of the gargoyles, meanwhile, began to act. One of them growled loudly, and then they both ran forward. Every step they took made everything around them tremble. They looked quite weighty. Standing in the pouring rain, Lucas and Evangelina prepared to repel the attack, and she told the monsters to attack. Listening to the sound of rain mixed with the rumble of heavy steps of gargoyles, Ash watched with a confident look at the warriors who were entrusted with the task of detaining the monsters. He was counting on them. The leaders of the gargoyles continued to approach, waving their weapons. Their red eyes sparkled, and when they approached, Lucas and Evangelina ran towards them, screaming loudly. A huge flail and a mace with sharp spikes quickly approached them. Lucas began to restrain the monster's weapon with a sword, and Evangelina defended herself with a shield. Faced with such force, they both decided to retreat back. Lucas gritted his teeth and said that they were strong, and Evangelina looked at her shield in shock and exclaimed that it had left a dent in her shield. Ash thought that it would certainly not be easy. Instead of the standard 1 boss, they got 2 identical ones. The gargoyles again decided to be the first to attack and began to wave their weapons, while Lucas and Evangelina dodge and defend themselves. Watching this, Ash thought that it was quite possible to defeat them. Lucas and Evangelina are 2 of the best tanks in the game. And finally Lily called out to His Highness, saying that the magical amplifier artifact was ready for use. This was the moment Ash had been waiting for so long. He shouted back that that was great. Let her activate it immediately. She obeyed, and after a magic circle appeared under the artifact, she reported that the artifact was a magic amplifier activated. A snow-white glow appeared around Ash, and he closed his eyes, thinking that the magical efficiency for one target character was increased by 100%. The target is him, Ash. He looked at his hand with a smile and said that this is what it feels like. He directly feels that he is capable of anything. The system reported the activation of the commander's eye skill. The world froze in an instant. Drops of rain hung in the air, and he looked at the leader of the gargoyles, and the system reported that the target had been captured. One body was available to him. Let him indicate the command. Ash's eyes flashed with a bright golden light, and he ordered the monster to kill its comrade. As soon as he uttered these words, the world began to move again, and a sharp flash of pain pierced him, and blood sprayed from his nose. He covered his mouth with his hand, and at that very moment realized that all the magic had left his body. The system reported that the complexity of the indication was high. There is a contrast between the user's endurance indicators and the target's magic indicator. Ash remembered how Jupiter and Lily easily killed gargoyles and thought that as a species, gargoyles have low magical defense. What does this mean? This means that they are vulnerable to almost any magic. In other words, they are resistant to mind control too. But if he uses a magic booster to double his magic stats one time, then he will gain full control. The system reported success. Full control is available to him. The leader of the gargoyles froze abruptly in place and his eyes turned blue. Rejoicing at this, Ash clenched his hand into a fist and ordered the monster to attack. Now this game is according to his rules. Obeying the order of the prince, the leader of the gargoyles with blue eyes turned sharply towards the gargoyle and struck it with a powerful blow. And Ash wiped the blood and clenched his hand into a fist, joyfully shouting that it can destroy whatever it wants. On the head of this monster after the last blow part of the helmet broke off. Lucas looks on with a surprised expression on his face, as does Evangelina, who loudly asks what are they doing. Ash looks at these gargoyles and thinks that monsters do not forgive betrayal. The monsters begin to fight each other, and he thinks that the gargoyle leaders are now swinging their maces wildly as they fight each other. They attacked coolly, striking blow after blow with the power of a siege weapon. But even individuals that are identical in appearance have differences. One of the gargoyle bosses grabs the other boss by the head and throws it very hard at the rest of the gargoyles who are standing on the wall. The boss falls on the wall and scatters the monsters that were around, and Ash thinks that this is a perfect landing on the 6th squad of gargoyles. He thought for a long time about how to lure these monsters there. It seems to have worked, so he now has one less problem. The gargoyle boss with blue eyes, surrounded by other monsters, begins to slowly rise with loud sounds. All the gargoyles look at this boss, who betrayed them, and shout loudly. Ash looks at this from afar and thinks that a fight has broken out between the monsters. The gargoyles grappled, using all their strength, wanting to kill each other. The second gargoyle leader took the side of the monsters after waking up from the attack. Ash looks at something with a very serious expression on his face and says that they must deal with this monster. Lucas and Evangeline stand in front of a huge boss gargoyle that looks at them. While the rest of the monsters are fighting the controlled boss, Ash says that his plan is simple. While the crazed monster fights against his own subordinates, they must defeat the second boss. He smiles while looking at them and asks, "Do they feel better now?" Lucas smiles, looks at the boss in front of him, and says that he would say it's twice as easy for him. Evangelina also smiles and says that now they can have fun. The huge boss gargoyle begins to move quickly towards them and makes very loud noises. Ash watches Lucas and Evangeline fight against a huge monster and thinks that with the number of bosses reduced to 1, it became easier to defend. However, the knight still couldn't do much damage to this boss. He begins to worry about what is happening and thinks that they need to somehow knock the armor off this monster. Otherwise his knights, even just the 2 of them, will only continue to fight off this boss. How could he do this? Immediately at that moment the elves came to him, who knelt before him, and Godhand says that the Shadow Squad is ready for battle. Ash was very surprised when he heard this and loudly asks, "Are they finished yet?" He looks at them intently and asks, "What about their wounds? Have they already been healed?" Godhand says Damien has completely healed them. They are ready to fight again. Ash looks at their weapons, which were almost completely broken, and says that their weapons are badly damaged. Godhand says this is enough for a couple of attacks. He looks at him with a very serious expression on his face and says that with their magic, it is quite possible. Ash loudly says that's great, then they should get down to business. Immediately after that, all the elves took their weapons, channeled their magic into the weapons, and aimed at the boss. Burnout has set up her large ballista, which she uses to target the monster. Godhand uses his magic to create many large metal arrows and loudly tells Bodybag that they are in on it too. After that, she immediately releases several waves of magic. They simultaneously begin to attack the huge gargoyle that stands on the wall in front of them with various magical attacks. All these shots hit the boss, destroyed parts of the armor, and Ash loudly says that this is great. They must continue to destroy this monster's armor like this. He looks at this and thinks that while the knights of the main squad are holding off the boss, the Shadow Squad is dealing damage with physical attacks. And after that they will switch to magical attacks and cause damage to the monster's body. But still, at any moment something can go wrong. The huge gargoyle swings his mace and is about to strike hard with his weapon. Evangelina notices this and, with a serious expression on her face, loudly says that she will cover for them. Suddenly she slips and the system notifies that the clumsiness skill is activated. She loses her balance and is very surprised because of this, while the boss attacks her with his weapon. The gargoyle boss takes advantage of this opportunity and hits her with a very strong blow from his mace. Ash notices this and is about to use magic, but feels unwell and loudly calls Evangeline's name. Because of his condition, he leans on the fence and loudly says that he used too much mana. Ash watches her fly towards the edge of the wall and thinks that luckily her shield is strong enough. But if you continue in the same spirit, he does not finish his thought, and Evangelina, who is thrown back by the blow of a huge monster, flies out of the wall and screams very loudly out of fear and surprise. Lucas manages to run up to her at the last moment and grab her by the cloak to prevent her from falling, and this greatly surprised her. He continues to hold her cloak, looks at Evangelina, who holds a shield and a spear in her hands, and says that her hands are always busy. Ash breathes a sigh of relief that she was saved and thinks that, however, it is not time to relax yet. He turns around and sees a huge gargoyle boss running towards them due to the fact that now no one is holding it back, and thinks that it is because the tanks are no longer holding this monster back. Because of this, the monster moved towards their DD. Godhand loudly tells his squad that they must open fire to prevent this monster from getting closer. They all start shooting their weapons at this monster, but all their arrows only fly off from the strong armor of this monster. Ash looks at this with a worried expression on his face and loudly says that this monster is running towards them like a bulldozer. Godhand looks at this gargoyle with a very serious expression on his face and says that he will try to buy time. The monster at the same moment swings and delivers a strong blow with his mace, and Godhand very quickly heads towards him. The monster delivers a very strong blow, but misses, and he manages to run under this gargoyle, touch his leg, and use his magic. Ash looks at this and thinks that Godhand melted the gargoyle's feet, and this monster is attached to the ground. The magic of metal helped them a lot. But in the end, even the versatility of the elves' defensive magic could do nothing against the overwhelming power of this giant. The boss gargoyle simply lifted his huge leg along with a large piece of the wall. Ash looks at Godhand's worried expression and thinks that no matter how hard he tried to buy time, the gargoyle boss didn't seem to feel his efforts. This monster was only focused on killing DD and him. Neither the arrows of the Shadow Squad nor the magic bullets that Damien shoots are able to stop this attacking monster. If nothing is done, then they will definitely be finished. He must urgently come up with at least something. He sees that the boss has gotten close enough to them and is about to attack and thinks that the only thing that can stop it. Ash does not have time to finish his thought because he notices a bright glow behind the back of this monster. He sees Lily sitting on the ground and creating a huge fireball with a serious expression on her face. Ash looks at her with great surprise and loudly calls her name. Lily looks at the gargoyle with a very serious and angry expression on her face, loudly calls it a monster, and says that it should listen to her. She hits this monster with a very powerful blast of fire magic and loudly says that she is the senior magician of the advanced monsters. After this very powerful attack, this huge monster fell on his knees and his entire body was charred after this attack. The elves look at this monster who stands in front of them with surprised expressions on their faces and ask, "Is the big gargoyle really defeated?" The monster suddenly begins to move slowly with loud sounds, which Ash notices and with a very serious expression on his face says loudly that it is still breathing. A huge, very badly wounded gargoyle suddenly turns away from them, and Ash realizes that the boss has changed his priorities. A gargoyle with a very badly disfigured face lets out a very loud scream as he looks at Lily, who attacked it from behind, and Ash thinks that this is now the opponent who used the strongest attack against him. Lily notices that this huge monster is targeting her. Tears appear in her eyes, and she loudly says that she knew this would happen. Ash realizes that she has attracted this monster's attention to herself. With a worried expression on his face, he calls Lily's name very loudly and says that she must leave there immediately. He remembers that she cannot walk and thinks that it is impossible. She had no mana left even to use the fire skin skill. Lily can only look at the monster that is quickly heading towards her, and she can only accept her inevitable fate. The huge gargoyle screams very loudly and strikes very hard with his mace. Lily closed her eyes and with a sad expression on her face was waiting for what would happen to her. But at the last moment something happened. Godhand steps between her and the monster and tells Miss Lily that she must stand behind him. She was very surprised when she heard this, opened her eyes, and saw an elf standing in front of her to protect her. The boss gargoyle deals a very strong blow with his weapon to Godhand, who got in the way, and Lily, shocked by what happened, wonders what he is doing. Godhand, who took the blow instead of her, received very serious injuries due to the fact that he stopped the blow with a huge mace with his bare hands and uses his magic. Godhand is under great stress from this monster's attack, but continues to use his magic anyway. His magic begins to work, and the monster's huge mace begins to disintegrate into small pieces. He had enough mana to destroy the arm and part of the gargoyle boss's body, which was made of metal. Ash looks at this and realizes that he has exposed the gargoyle's core. Godhand turns around very quickly and with a serious expression on her face loudly asks the older magician if she can strike again. Lily very quickly realized what she needed to do and began to use her magic to attack the huge monster that stood in front of her. She gathers all the strength she had and creates a fireball that she is about to release and screams loudly before attacking. Godhand jumps to the side and she immediately releases the fireball she created and hits the gargoyle boss's core. Because of the fireball that Lily released, the core inside the monster begins to crack with a loud sound. A huge gargoyle falls to the ground with a loud sound and screams as the fragments of this monster's core fall to the ground. Ash watches what is happening and thinks that suddenly the boss monster has stopped moving. He turns around and, with a serious expression on his face, tells Damien loudly that Godhand needs immediate medical attention. He immediately begins to run along with the elves to Lily, who put Godhand on her lap, and the Shadow Squad loudly calls for their captain because they are worried about him. She sits on the ground and asks the elf why he decided to protect her. Godhand looks at her with a calm expression and says that he acted using common sense. His arm was broken due to the monster's attack, and he says that she is the only one who has enough firepower to deal the final blow to the boss monster. That's the whole reason. Lily looks at him with a surprised expression on her face and cannot answer this. At the same time, Lucas and Evangelina return to the prince and called him. She says that she apologizes for making a mistake. He bows and tells His Highness that they have no forgiveness. They are ready to suffer any punishment, even execution. Ash wonders if he looks like the kind of person who would do such a thing. Knights are ready to pay with their lives for their mistakes. He says they should stop and listen to him. He thinks that, although not without losses, in the end both monster bosses were defeated. He sees how many gargoyles defeated the boss monster that was on his wall and thinks that he was very lucky with the Commander's Eye skill, which helped a lot by seizing control of one of the bosses. The last 40 gargoyles remained. We need to finish these monsters as soon as possible. Ash looks around the battlefield and thinks that, however, everyone is already pretty exhausted. Especially Lucas and Evangelina, who mostly held off the onslaught of monsters. Damien has already used up all his mana, and Lily is at the limit of her capabilities, as is the Shadow Squad. Will they be able to defeat the remaining monsters given the situation they find themselves in? One of the veterans points his hand in the direction of the monsters and loudly says that they should take aim and open fire. Immediately after his order, the soldiers who, under the command of this man, controlled the cannons begin to shoot. Many projectiles fly into the crowd of gargoyles, who notice it too late. All the shots from the cannons hit the crowd of monsters, and there are many explosions with loud sounds. The veteran, with a very joyful expression on his face, says that a fire curtain is no longer required, because monsters will no longer fly from the south. He asks my lord, he wouldn't mind a little support, would he? Ash was very surprised when he saw this and looked at them silently for several seconds. He gives a thumbs up and says with a small smile that there are no objections. It's a great move. After that, the soldiers continued to fire their guns at the remaining monsters that were on the wall. The rays of the sun begin to break through the dark clouds and illuminate the fort, and the rain stops and the remaining drops flow down the cannons. The last gargoyles that were on the wall were defeated by cannon shots and lie in the rubble, and Lucas says that the floating gargoyles are no longer visible. He turns around and tells my lord that they have won. Ash looks at him and doesn't say anything for a few seconds. He raises his head, looks at the sky, and thinks that naturally, it only rained when they were fighting. The clouds begin to disperse. The sun begins to illuminate the fort, and he thinks that now the rain has stopped immediately. All the soldiers looked at him. Ash lowers his head, closes his eyes, sighs, and thinks that he is sure that he doesn't want to hear something like that right after winning, but he has to say it. He collected his thoughts and, with a serious expression on his face, loudly says that they must transfer the wounded to the infirmary. Everyone must assess the damage to the equipment and the fortress, and then provide him with detailed reports. Even if they made a mistake in today's battle, their task is to learn from it for the future. This is the only way they can become professionals. He thinks a lot about what mistakes he made in every defensive battle. Constantly analyzes what needs to be improved. The experiences of his trials are etched on his bones. This is the only way to bring the strategy to the ideal so that people stop wasting their lives. He says that every day they become stronger, and every day this front line becomes stronger. And like this fortress, he too becomes a better commander. He is immensely grateful to them for helping him become a better person. Ash looks down and is silent for a few seconds. He raises his hand, which all the soldiers do after him, and says loudly that they must stop talking. They must prepare meat and alcohol, because today he pays for everything. He thinks that one might think that there were cases when someone else paid instead of him. The soldiers shout joyfully and praise the prince as God-Hand is carried away on a stretcher next to them. Ash thinks that in the midst of the cheering crowd, he noticed how he was carried away to the infirmary. He also noticed how Lily was looking lost on the ground with a blank look. He continues to look at her while many soldiers rejoice at the victory and thinks that this is how another defensive battle ended. The system notifies that wave number 4 is reflected. A reward is received and placed in his inventory. Rank R Lily became MVP. Casualties and injuries, God-Hand SR rank is seriously injured. After some time in the infirmary, a very badly injured God-Hand lies on the bed while healing magic is used on him. Margaret tries to heal him and says that everything below his elbow is crushed. The stage at which healing by magic is possible has long been passed. Ash stands next to her and asks, "What does this mean?" Margaret turns to him and says that his arm will have to be amputated. God-Hand begins to lose consciousness and slowly closes his eyes as they talk. He continues to slowly close his eyes due to extreme fatigue, and Margaret says that it seems that his forearm needs to be amputated. The patient has already given consent. Ash asks what does it mean to give consent. After that, he leaves the infirmary, which is illuminated by the bright sun. He met the elves from the Shadow Squad and thinks that they were standing in front of the infirmary and waiting for their commander to be operated on. He honestly told them about the current state of God-Hand. And then he heard something unexpected. Ash asks with a surprised expression, what did they say? Bodybag says the captain already lost an arm 2 years ago during a military operation. After that he changed 2 more prostheses, as well as his name to God-Hand. So he'll be fine. Lost hands can be replaced with metal ones. She believes that he can fight like before. Ash looks at her in surprise, cannot say anything, and thinks that this is not about his performance. He is not some kind of mechanism. Even if you replace the broken part, even if everything works again, you can't pretend like nothing happened. Severe wounds still remain in the soul, and it will never disappear. The elves in front of him stand silently and just look down for a few seconds with sad expressions on their faces. Ash says that if something hurts, they should say so, and he will take care of them. He thinks that's what he told them. It's strange to hear this from a commander who, at the very first battle, pushed them to the limit. Ash says they should go from here. There will be a victory banquet tonight. He's sorry God Hand won't be able to attend, but they should definitely eat well and get some rest. Old Girl tells His Highness that everything is fine. They'd better stay here and wait for the captain's operation to end. Ash says they can do as they please. He will order food and drinks to be delivered to them. He looks at them with a smile and says that although they won't be able to celebrate the victory together, they did a great job today. They need to remember this. All the elves were happy when they heard this and looked at him with smiles. Ash says they must take care of their captain. The elves agree, wave to him as he leaves, and loudly say that he should send them more delicious food and drinks. She loves juice. Ash leaves with a smile and thinks that he will have to order 3 barrels of juice to be delivered to them. Some time later, when night fell and a large number of people gathered at tables with food in the square, Ash came to them and asked with a smile how they dared to start when their lord had not even made a toast yet. People notice him and loudly say that the prince has come here. They all look at him with joyful expressions on their faces, loudly call him Commander, Lord of the South, and say that he is a man who was born to kill monsters. Ash says they should calm down and give him a glass too. After that, he stood up on the wooden stage while all the people were looking at him and said that he would be brief. When he says Southern Front, they should say drink and die. Did they understand it? He raises his mug of alcohol with a joyful expression and says loudly South Front. All the people standing in front of him also raise their mugs and loudly say drink and die. Ash takes a sip from the mug, but begins to cough due to the bad taste and thinks that he can't get used to the local alcohol. He turns around, notices Eider, and loudly says that he has business with him. Eider heard him, turns around with trays in his hands, and says that of course he can order him anything. He approaches him and asks him in the form of a song what he wants, meat or alcohol. If he needs music, then he is ready to perform a song. Ash says he shouldn't do this. He must go and take food and drinks to the infirmary. Eider agrees, but remains standing in place and makes a dissatisfied sound, and Ash wonders why he is standing still. Suddenly, he starts making him angry again. With a very angry expression on his face, he grabbed Eider by the head and loudly asked this freak, what does this mean? He must immediately go and feed all the healers and wounded in the infirmary. Did he understand it? He must bring 3 barrels of juice there. He stops because Lily has approached them and says that she will take it. Ash loosens his grip, looks at her in surprise, and asks what did she say. He wants to ask her something, while Lily stands still and looks at him with a calm expression on her face. Some time later, Ash walks through the square and loudly says that if they continue to drink like this, they will never get rid of all the alcohol that has accumulated here. They should bring him mugs. People were very happy when they saw him and loudly said that, as expected, the 3rd prince drinks better than anyone in the empire. Will they really see this legend with their own eyes today? Ash stops in front of a table with many mugs filled with alcohol and loudly says that he will prove it all. Today they will reach the end. They all continue to drink and party loudly. Ash remembers Cheryl and thinks that, as the Margraves said, if you always mourn the fallen, then life will turn into endless wakes. Sometimes you need to be able to have some fun. People continue to have fun, and several soldiers pour alcohol from barrels on the old man, while Ash drinks alcohol from a mug in the company of several men and thinks that it is the Lord's responsibility to take care of the wounded and pay honors to the dead. So drinking with the survivors and having fun is also part of his job. He tries to lighten the situation by laughing loudly and drinking with everyone. The night of victory went on as usual. At the same time, Godhand came to his senses after the operation, sharply opened his eyes, and began to breathe heavily. He calms down and notices that his arm has been amputated. He turns and notices Lily, who is sitting in the same room with him, with a calm expression on her face, writing something on a piece of paper and asking, "Is he finally awake?" Godhand wants to ask her something, but she interrupts him by turning to him and saying that the operation was successful. The fever will persist for some time, as will the pain. Tomorrow at 7 o'clock in the morning, his dose of healing magic will be renewed. Everything below the elbow was removed, but the joints were left. This will make it easier for him to move the prostheses. All the elves from his squad are lying on another bed in the same room and sleeping peacefully. Lily looks at them and says that the members of his squad just recently fell asleep, and before that they ate well and had a lot of fun. Maybe he's hungry. She left some food for him. He needs to eat well as he has lost a lot of blood. Godhand looks at her and asks why she cares about him. Doesn't she hate him? Lily stopped writing something and looked at him silently for several seconds. She put the quill on the table and says that she has a question, so she was waiting for him to wake up. Godhand looks at her blankly and doesn't say anything, and Lily says that no matter how much she thinks about it, she still can't understand him. Why did he save her then? When the gargoyle boss suddenly ran to attack, why did he cover it with his body, taking the blow, which caused him to lose his arms? That's what she wanted to ask. Godhand looks at her with a calm expression and says that he answered back then. Under those circumstances, her safety was a priority. Lily raises her voice and says with a serious expression that he should stop saying this nonsense. He must not pretend to be a great strategist. Maybe this makes sense, but only for their front. Personally, he should have had no reason to risk himself to save her, given the injuries he suffered in the process. The Shadow Squad has only recently become part of Crossroads' defenses. It's too early for such sacrifices. No one expected that the commander of a detachment entering service for the first time would sacrifice his hands and life for the good of the common goal. Even if this is true, there are too many inconsistencies in this version. There must be some other reason. Lily came to him to find out, even though he suffered so much in order to protect her. She says that it was still a salvation. Did he make this decision too quickly? There is nothing more burdensome than unexpected kindness. He must tell her honestly. Why did he save her? Godhand listened to her and silently looks at her with a calm expression on his face. He asks if he can speak frankly. Lily says of course he can, otherwise she won't accept his answer. After a long silence, Godhand began to speak. He remembers what happened then and says that the reason is not very outstanding. At the moment when the gargoyle boss rushed towards her, he remembered his mother. Lily listens to him carefully and asks if he told his mother. Godhand says that his mother, like her, could not walk. The slave owners to whom she was captured cut her tendons. She spent her entire life crawling on her knees. She was unable to get up when their master beat him. She always covered him with herself and took all the blows. Then he suddenly remembered it. As she looked helplessly at the gargoyle before him, he remembered the image of his mother. Lily listens to his story with her hands on him and asks if he wants to say that she reminded him of his mother because of the problem with his legs. Godhand asks if this makes her sad. Lily says that, to be honest, not much. He says that she herself asked to speak frankly. Lily raised her voice, agreed with him, and said that everything was like that, but... She calmed down a little, propped her head on her hand, sighed and asked, did he really lose his arms only for this reason? Godhand looks at her and says that besides the rational reasons he spoke about earlier, his personal emotional motivation lies in the image of his mother. It seems that such explanations should be sufficient. Lily looks at him and says that she thought he was a more rational guy. Godhand says he thought she was a more emotional girl. He didn't even think about the fact that she would look for a hidden reason in the fact that someone risked their life to save her. Lily turned out to be more cold-blooded than he thought. Godhand says they can never understand each other. The wounds that their races have passed down through the generations are perhaps too deep to be healed. He looks out the window and asks, however, despite this, can't they celebrate together that they are alive? He sees how everyone in the square is celebrating the victory and loudly singing the song, "Comrade, let's press our backs to each other. Fight a wave of enemies. Comrade, raise your glass higher. Be grateful they survived." Lily hears this song and silently looks for several seconds at Godhand, who lies next to her. She continues to look at him and says that she hates him. He turns to her and asks if it's too cruel to say this to someone who lost his arms to protect her. Lily goes to him and says that it doesn't matter, he must eat. He shouldn't starve while others feast. She placed the dish on a small table along with a glass of water, and Godhand asks, is it just water? Lily asks if the doctor allowed him to drink alcohol after the operation. He asks if he can't even drink anymore, even though he's lost his arms. She sits next to him and says that it turns out that he is still in the mood for jokes. She took her glass, which was also standing on the table, put it on her feet, and silently thought about something for several seconds. Her face turned a little red. She raised her glass and asked if maybe they should have a drink. Godhand says he doesn't have hands to lift his glass. Lily took the second glass, which she hid on hers, and says that she will do it for him. She brings the glass to his face, and this surprised Godhand, because he did not expect this. Lily continues to hold the two glasses, and they both look at each other. She helps him drink water from this glass, and he does not resist. She is about to drink the drink from her glass, and says that this is so ridiculous. A legless girl and an armless elf, who simply cannot attend the banquet, simply sit together and drink in a hospital room. Godhand looks out the window, agrees with her, and says that this is an unforgettable evening. He looks at the bright lights of the fort through the window and says that he would quickly forget an ordinary banquet, but this one will remain in his memory for a long time. He turns around and says that it's probably too bold to ask her for that. But could she continue to take care of him? Lily was embarrassed by what he had just said and looked at him silently for several seconds with a surprised expression on her face. She stuffed bread into his mouth and said that he had better quickly regain his strength. As long as he's healthy, it's much easier to hate him. Godhand smiles sincerely, laughs, and says that then he would prefer to remain like this. Lily says that he should stop talking nonsense, even with such a face. After that they didn't talk anymore, and she slowly fed Godhand the cold ones, and he silently ate it all. In the distance, drunken soldiers continued to sing various war songs. The night of victory was drawing to a close. The next morning, Ash wakes up in bed with a very exhausted look on his face and thinks that he seems to have had too much to drink. His hand crashed into something under his blanket, and he was surprised because of it. He notices that he is not alone in bed and asks loudly, "Who else is it?" Ash is very worried and wonders if he really woke up drunk next to some woman. What kind of cliché is this? The one who is lying next to him begins to rise. Long gray hair is visible from under the blanket, and this man asks His Highness, "Is he already awake?" An old man with a kind expression on his face and long hair removes the blanket from himself and looks at him, which scared Ash very much and made him scream in great surprise. The rest of the men who slept with them in the same room also begin to slowly get up and yawn after sleep. Ash was even more surprised by this, screams loudly and asks, "This is hell, isn't it?" He's definitely in hell. The man sitting on the floor tells His Highness that he should calm down. It's just them. Twilight Legion. He is okay. He drank quite a lot yesterday. Ash has calmed down a little and says that everything seems to be fine with him. Can he ask one question? Why are they all here shirtless? The man was surprised by this question and said that it was he who ordered them. Last night, Ash takes off his shirt and says loudly that they should drop their pretentiousness. They should drink comfortably, man to man. They all have to take off their clothes and scream. The man says that everyone agreed with him and took off their clothes. Ash is very embarrassed about this and wonders if he did it. Is he really like this when he drinks? Why did he even do this? The men tell His Highness that last night was simply amazing. It was the best feast of their lives. They will forever remember last night's amazing night. Ash wonders if it's possible he will never know the details of what happened yesterday. Someone comes to them and asks my lord, "Has he woken up yet?" He heard it and thinks it is a familiar voice. Isn't that Lucas? He turns around, sees his face and wonders, has he really come to save him from this hell? Looking below, Ash notices that he was wearing only shorts. He was very surprised by this and loudly asked why he also took off his pants. Lucas looks at him with a calm expression and says that he himself ordered all members of the main squad to take off their pants. Ash was very surprised when he heard this and asks if he said that. What is this anyway? He thinks he's getting a headache because of what his crazy character is doing. Damien lies on the bed without a blanket and says he is cold. Ash thinks he is very ashamed and really regrets it. There was pure hell and madness at last night's party. The more he thinks about it, the more he will suffer, so he gave up trying to recover his memories. He gets very angry about this and says that the only time he needed to see a naked man was in the bathhouse. Lucas says with a smile that he was just about to say this, they should go. Ash was confused when he heard this and looks at him and asks where should they go. Lucas says that he just said it himself. They should go to the public bath. It's very close. Ash was surprised when he heard this and asks did he say public bath. Sometime after they got dressed and took everything they needed. Lucas walks down the street with a basket in his hand and asks, do soldiers who get dirty in the blood of monsters almost every day need to wash somewhere? Initially, this bathhouse was intended only for warriors. Ash understood what he wanted to say and asked. However, as the scale of the city increased, did ordinary residents begin to use the bathhouse? Lucas looks at him with a smile and tells my lord that that's exactly how it happened. Ash stops and asks, by the way, why is this building so huge? He and Damien stop, look at this building, and Lucas says that it is so big that there is enough space for all the soldiers. They need to come here. They stop when they notice that Damien asks His Highness, is something wrong? Ash stands still and asks, isn't there usually some kind of event with female characters at the bathhouses? He wonders, maybe he's mistaken. They all went into the men's bathhouse together, and he realized that he was wrong. There were no such events, at least not in his life. Ash sits shoulder deep in water and says that at least there are no problems with the plumbing here. Lucas stands next to him and says that due to the fact that there was not enough water repeatedly, they decided to establish a water supply here. Ash turns to him and asks if he's not going to take a shower. Lucas says he'll just stand by and keep him safe. This is always and everywhere his work. Ash says that he should stop thinking like that already. He needs to wash himself too. There is another large bath nearby. Lucas gets into the water and says that then, with his permission, he will use it. Ash agrees and says that he should climb in quickly. He turns to him, is a little surprised when he notices something and thinks that he suspected it before, but up close it is much more noticeable. He looks at Lucas's body, which is covered with many scars, and asks, he didn't have an easy life, right? He thinks that his whole body is covered with numerous scars. This is a kind of imprint of all the difficulties that he had to go through. Lucas smiles with a kind expression on his face and tells my lord that everything is fine. They both notice Damien floating around the pool on his back with a very happy expression on his face. Ash calls his name and asks if he is okay. Damien, with a joyful but tired expression on his face, tells His Highness that, of course, everything is simply incredible. Ash asks what even happened yesterday. Lucas says that he thinks it would be better to forget everything that happened yesterday. Ash looks at him with a surprised expression on his face and wonders what else he did yesterday. At the same moment, a large crowd of men goes next to them to the bathhouse. Ash notices this huge crowd of people and loudly asks, what is this? When they got closer, he realized that these were all people from the Twilight Legion, and one of them, with a joyful expression on his face, said that it was time for them to freshen up. All these men climbed into the pools and began to discuss something with joyful expressions on their faces. Ash says that he will probably leave from here. Lucas, who was next to him, agrees with my lord. One of the soldiers notices them and says that His Highness is also here. All the other men notice him too, show a warlike salute, and loudly say, "Long live His Highness." Ash leaves with a confused look on his face and thinks that he should issue a decree so that the bathhouses don't have to use this gesture. After that, they went to the restroom in the public bath. Ash sits on the bench and says that he feels much better. He turns to the side and thinks that he can't believe that they have such advanced technology here. He even regrets making fun of the fantasy world. This is actually very good, right? Evangelina and Lily enter this room. She notices him and loudly calls him my lord. Ash turns to her and asks what is she doing here. Evangelina goes to him and says that she lives in the area, so she often visits the public bathhouse. Lily also heads towards him and asks His Highness what he is doing here. Ash says that he himself is still tormented by doubts. Did they come here together? Evangelina says that they decided to wash together. He says he's surprised at how friendly they are. She says that sooner or later everyone becomes close to those with whom they fight side by side. She leans over and with a joyful smile asks her older sister, "Is she right?" Lily looks at her and smiles and tells this young lady that what she said was true. Ash looks at them and thinks that it seems to him that only Evangeline is getting closer to her here. However, Lily is really the only one close to her age. He understands why she tries so hard to be friendly to her. On the other hand, Lily can also be understood. She is clearly nervous and wants to retire. So getting close to the heir to the title of Margrave may be burdensome for her. Evangelina continues to smile and tells my lord that they will probably go. They will see each other later, but now they need to discuss something together. She quickly runs away with Lily and Ash says that they should wait. They don't listen to him and he thinks that they are heartless. They could sit with him a little longer. Someone calls him my lord, and with a slightly surprised expression on his face, he turns and looks at the one who called him. Margaret walks towards him and says with a calm expression that this is very unexpected. She would never have thought that royalty visited places like this. Ash didn't recognize her because she was wearing different clothes and asked who she was. Margaret wipes her hair, says her name, and says that she is a saint. He was surprised by this and thinks that he did not recognize her at all. This is probably because he always saw her only in a cassock. Ash asks if she uses the public bath too. Margaret stands in front and asks if there is a law that prohibits clergy from washing. Ash says of course there is no such thing. She says with a smile that yesterday she had a difficult operation, so she would like to relax and wash herself. Ash thinks she's right. She was the one who operated on Godhand yesterday. He asks, was the operation successful? Margaret asks, he sent so many people to find out about the outcome of the operation. Was he really not informed about the result? Ash, with a slightly confused expression on his face, laughs and agrees with her. Margaret says everything went well. He is now recovering well. In the morning she cast a healing spell and then decided to go to the bathhouse. She didn't think there would be so many people here. Ash thinks that the siege only ended yesterday, and then there was a celebration all night. So it's no wonder there are so many people here today. He says that he is grateful for her work and asks for forgiveness if his soldiers suddenly caused her problems. Margaret says everything is fine. War is a terrible and cruel phenomenon, but she believes that the struggle here, at the front, is sacred. Ash asks if this war is sacred because the goal is to protect people. Margaret closed her eyes and with a small smile agrees and says that therefore, washing away the blood and sweat after the holy war is also a worthy activity. And it's great that she can take part in this. Ash looks at her with a smile and thinks that he thinks it sounds a little pretentious, but on the other hand, such an answer is full of inspiration. Margaret turns around, notices several girls and says she has to go. The girls are already waiting for her. Ash agrees and says she should enjoy the break. Margaret leaves and tells His Highness that he too should enjoy his holiday. Ash looks at her with other girls and thinks that, contrary to his misconceptions, they are all ordinary people here in the good sense of the word. He looks at the system window with Lucas and Damien and wonders where those two went. They just went to get water, so what made them delay? Ash looks up and says, I wish there was Sikai here. He thinks that the local atmosphere makes him want Sikai. If he ate a boiled egg right now, he would chew it and wash it down with a glass of ice-cold Sikai. It would be heaven on earth. At such moments, he especially misses the earth. At the same moment, Lucas and Damien run towards them and call His Highness. Ash notices them and loudly asks why they were gone for so long. Lucas takes out a small bag from his robe and says that these are boiled eggs. They just bought it from a black marketer in a bathhouse. Ash looks at this with great surprise and wonders which black marketer he is talking about. Damien pulls out a large carafe and says they also have chilled honey lemonade. Ash was surprised by this and wonders how they guessed what he wanted. Lucas and Damien both lean towards him with smiles and simultaneously say that they can eat it in secret. Ash thinks it's a great idea. He is grateful to them for what they are. Evangelina says with a sly smile that she is surprised at how much they got. She gives off a very angry and scary aura and asks how about sharing with the ladies. They seem to have a team of 5. Damien could not withstand her attack and fell to the ground. Evangelina holds Ash's hand, in which he holds the egg, and loudly says that he should give it to her. Lily tries to take the lemonade from him, which he is holding in his other hand, and asks if she can have some of the lemonade. Ash is very unhappy with what they are doing and loudly asks why they pestered him. At the same time, Lucas is standing not far from them, and while they are not paying attention to him, he eats boiled eggs. Some time later, they all calmed down and sat down on the bench. Ash, with a very pleased expression on his face, says that he feels very good. He thinks that it seems that in his free time he should get to know the city better and all the hot spots that are there. Lucas takes out the bag that he hid in his robe and says that he will clean everything up here. Ash thanked him for this. Sometime after this lunch break, he opened the status window to prepare for the next fight. He looks at the system window and thinks that it is stage 5. Finally, he had information. The most difficult obstacle at the initial stage. Boss wave. Every wave divisible by 5 is a boss wave. It will be a very complex wave, completely different from the ones they reflected before. The system window says that the remaining time until the 5th wave is 28 days and 9 hours. Ash thinks the good thing is that they still have enough time to prepare for this. He needs to think things through more carefully, if he manages to pass this stage. He does not have time to finish his thought because someone approached him and greeted His Highness. Ash notices the guy who said this and asks who he is. The guy says his name is Dion Eggart. Ash looks at him and thinks that he seems to remember him. He is one of the N-rank heroes that he recruited not long ago. N-rank heroes are slightly stronger than ordinary soldiers, but have mostly mediocre characteristics. This happened in the game too, but to be honest, he doesn't remember any of them. In the system window, it is written that this is subgroup number 2. All members of N-rank, who's 14th level. Rock, Isla, and Hess are level 15. Dion is level 16. Ash thinks that his group is currently listed as a sub-team being used as a backup. He asks, so what was he suitable for? Dion tells His Highness that he has a claim. Lucas was very angry when he heard this, but Ash took it more calmly, was a little surprised and wondered what he just said. Dion turns to the people from his squad who are standing nearby and says that a month has already passed since the 5 of them arrived here. But other than supporting the rear, he never gave them any worthwhile orders. And the monsters simply don't get there. They are actually mercenaries. They need work to provide for their lives. Ash looks at him with a little surprise and thinks that he acted arrogant and confident, but thought like a mercenary. Dion says he doesn't care if he looks down on them just because. That they are young and inexperienced. But he doesn't like to gradually rust, not having the opportunity to gain this very experience. They all use the military salute together, and he says that so he asks to send them to the front line. They will prove that they are capable of fighting on par with the rest. Ash was very shocked by what he just said and couldn't say anything to him. He crosses his arms in front of him and thinks that they seem to be quite confident. Their characteristics and skills are mediocre, but their eyes are full of determination. Especially this guy named Dion. He is quite ambitious. Ash continues to smile and says that he seems to be confident. How can he prove this to him? The word must be confirmed by deeds. Dion, with a happy expression on his face, says that they can have a duel. He wants to fight fairly with the members of the main squad. Will this be enough? Ash continues to smile and thinks that he never expected this. Lucas sits with a calm expression on his face and says that this is very arrogant. Evangelina lies next to him, looks at them upside down and says that it is very interesting. When can they start? Ash says he likes his enthusiasm. He agrees, they can arrange it. But he will choose the time and place of the duel himself. Dion tells His Highness that there is no problem at all. When should they expect his decision? Ash says they don't have to wait long for this. They can start right now, in the closest place. Some time later. A large crowd of people walking in one direction and asking what's going on there. He heard that there would be a fight. Members of the main squad against new recruits. This is interesting. They need to quickly go there and take their seats. A large crowd of people gathers at the training ground and stands watching the people in the arena. Damien asks if they can cope without them. Lily stands next to him, agrees and says that she thinks they can handle this. Lucas holds a wooden sword in his hand, stretches his shoulder and asks if she is ready. Evangelina stands next to him with wooden equipment and says that she is still ready. What about him? The members of the sub-squad stand next to each other and Dion says that there are slight changes in the plan, but they must act as agreed and must stick to this plan. Did they understand it? The rest of his squad say that they understand everything and will definitely cope. After that, they all went together towards their opponents and Dion says that this is great. They should go forward. Ash looks at them and says that it looks like everyone is ready. Lucas, with a scary expression on his face, walks towards them and says that he doesn't know what they're planning, but he feels that it will end quickly. Evangelina, with an equally frightening expression on her face, spins her spear above her head and says that she will try to be gentle with them. Ash hopes they don't overdo it. The battle conditions are simple. The team that defeats all opponents will win. A victory will be counted if the opponent can no longer use the weapon, surrenders, or is eliminated. Safety comes first, so using attacks or skills that could cause serious harm is prohibited. Ash waves a red flag and says they should all get ready and can begin. Immediately after this, Dion quickly ran towards Lucas, who calmly stood still and looked at him. He holds 2 daggers in his hand and says loudly that he must show him his techniques, which he has heard a lot about. Lucas looks at him with a calm expression and says that a wooden dagger is not the best choice of weapon. He strikes very quickly with his sword and Dion manages to notice it at the last moment. He managed to duck and avoided a sword strike from Lucas, who is looking at him with a very serious expression on his face. Dion looks at him with a surprised expression and says that, however, with a dagger it is much easier to dodge. Isn't he right? Immediately afterwards, he jumps to the side, but Lucas immediately runs after him, about to stab him with his sword and says that he shouldn't be so boring. He'll finish him right now. At the same time, Evangelina stands still while she looks at the rest of the squad members who are walking in her direction, hums a melody with a wide smile, and says that this is an excellent choice. She raises her voice and says that she always knew that she looked 4 times more dangerous than this old man. Isn't this true? She looks at the opponents who are coming towards her with a more serious expression on her face and says that she will now show them what the best student of the academy can do. 3 guys simultaneously crashed into her with their shields, which greatly surprised Evangelina, and she loudly asks what is wrong with them. Are they doing this seriously? Che turns to the others and says loudly that they must do their best. Evangelina was very surprised when they began to push her over the edge of the arena and loudly said that they should wait a little. Unexpectedly, she was able to stop them all and planted her foot on the ground. She begins to put more effort, begins to push them back, and with an angry look on her face, says loudly that they have chosen the wrong opponent. Jessen tries his best to stop her, but is surprised that they can't and loudly asks where she gets so much strength from. Unexpectedly, Isla very quickly runs up to her from the side, holding a wooden dagger in her hand. She looks at Evangeline and asks to forgive her for this. She strikes her leg with a dagger, but at the last moment she raises her leg and dodges this blow. Because of this, she loses her balance and the 3 guys immediately begin to push her back. She falls on her back over the edge of the arena, and people from the sub-squad stand in front of her. Evangelina stands up abruptly and loudly says that this is not fair. Isn't this against the rules? Ash says everything is according to the rules, they defeated her. He thinks that even if the battle is 2 against 5, and the level difference between the 2 sides is like heaven and earth, they can still be defeated if the team works together and uses the element of surprise. Ash watches with a smile and thinks that he should admit that it was a good move. They did a great job. Isla turns around with a joyful expression on her face and says that they need to help Dion. There is only 1 night left. She notices Lucas, who is holding Dion with one hand, who asks for their forgiveness. He looks towards his sub-squad and says that this night turned out to be very strong. Lucas looks at them with a cold gaze and says that he needs his next opponent. He threw Dion to the ground and slowly walks towards the others with an aura that greatly frightens them. Some time later, he defeated the entire sub-squad single-handedly and dusts off his hands after that, and Ash thinks that, as expected, the fight ended in victory for the main squad. Evangeline looks at him with a very dissatisfied expression as he raises his hand and loudly says that Lucas is the winner. He thinks that the difference in levels cannot be overcome. This is logical, because his current level is 37. From the very beginning, it was a futile fight. Dion sits on the ground, looks down and says that he should have realized that he was no match for him. He is surprised when he notices Lucas approaching him and saying that he did well. However, he came up with tactics against the enemy and successfully applied it in battle. The most important thing is that he had the courage to attack an opponent who was many times superior to him. This is a very important trait that matters in the fight against monsters. Dion was delighted and a little embarrassed because he praised him. Ash thinks that in order to defeat a real monster, it is important to be able to stand unshakably against an enemy who can be many times larger and stronger. This is already quite a rare gift. Ash lifts Dion up and says they have to get up. He asks them for forgiveness for underestimating them and depriving them of work. And he also asks for forgiveness in advance, because since they have proven their worth, he will use them until his death. Dion and his squad were very surprised when they heard this. Ash thinks it was a little unexpected, but suddenly people he had only neglected before came to his aid. The whole detachment shows a military salute and loudly says that they will do as His Highness wishes. Ash looks at them and thinks that the N-rank unit is the weakest unit he has ever used. Dion, with a joyful expression on his face, says that if he had planned to quietly meet old age, he would not have become a mercenary. Ash thinks that from this moment on, the second subgroup of Dion mercenaries was considered a strategically important unit. The next day after lunch, Ash sits on a chair, looks out the system window, and thinks that this is the first time that Dion's mercenaries have been deployed for mining. This is an autonomous type of reconnaissance, in which you can send a sub-squad to an already cleared area. Additional units independently increase their level and at the same time collect random items. Usually players call it munition. Since this is the first dungeon for the mercenary squad, Evangelina was sent with them as a guide. Ash smiles and thinks that automatic item extraction is great. In the future, he should use them more often. Between waves, it will be very good. Lucas comes to him and asks my lord if everything will be okay. He knows that the dungeon under the lake is full of enemies. Hearing this, Ash remembered about Crown and thinks that he doesn't mean monsters. Most likely, we are talking about the Nightcrawler, a hostile NPC faction. Lucas says that if they accidentally run into them, they won't be able to return safely. Maybe he should go after them. Ash turns him down and says that he is not going to send them to the main camp area. Lucas asks, why did he decide that? Ash remembers what Eider told him earlier, that in zones 1 through 3 of the kingdom under the lake, squad battles are prohibited. This is due to the fact that in the test period, there were precedents for surprise attacks at the very beginning. So he implemented a special protection system for newcomers. Ash, with a very angry expression on his face, lifts his nose with 2 fingers and loudly asks why he didn't tell him about this before. Do squad battles open from the 4th zone? Eider holds his nose and says that he must be careful. He will be severely punished for PvP in the initial zones. In fact, every NPC in the kingdom under the lake knows about this. Only from the 4th zone onwards he should be careful. Ash slams his palms hard on the table and loudly says that they will not cross the borders of the main camp. He shouldn't ask for reasons. Besides, there is something to do there and in the initial zones. Lucas was very surprised by this and loudly said that he was absolutely right. He is very insightful. Ash looks at him with a calm expression and says that he hopes that all his questions are over. It's already lunchtime, so they should go eat. Lucas tells His Highness that this is a great idea, otherwise he has his whole day planned out. Ash asks if he wants to go on vacation. The rest are resting. Damien comes into his office and loudly calls for His Highness. Ash notices him and says that he told him to rest. Something happened. Damien is trying to catch his breath due to fatigue from running and wants to tell him something. He was able to calm down and says that Mrs. Jupiter has come to her senses. Ash was surprised when he heard and wonders if she finally woke up. At the same time, the northern gate of the city crossroad. A girl came to the entrance to the city smoking a pipe. This girl, looking like a witch, lifts her hat and looks at this city. She stands at the entrance to the city and asks, "Is this the very front line where Grandma works?" Sometime later, Ash enters the room and loudly asks Jupiter if she is alive. She sits on the bed and is about to eat, but gets distracted and turns to him. She tells His Highness that they have not seen each other for a long time. How many days did she spend unconscious? Ash says it's been almost 10 days. He is glad to see that she is on the mend. He sets up a chair for himself and asks how she feels. Jupiter says that she would like to say that everything is wonderful, but to be honest, she doesn't feel very good. Her monocirculation circle is still not working well. Recovery will take some time. Ash sits across from her and asks if she thinks it will fully recover. Jupiter says that it will recover over time, but she is not sure that everything will be the same. This is the price of blocking several powerful magical attacks. Ash says she should eat well and recover for now. Without her electrical magic, they had a hard enough time. So she would need to recover before the next battle. Jupiter starts laughing loudly and says she will do her best. Of course, she still needs to work out the missed week. Her hand shakes very much and says that she definitely can't resign just yet, because she still has unfinished business. Ash asks what is her business. She's planning to build a castle, that's why she's working so hard. Jupiter laughed at this and asked His Highness how he guessed. He is really very insightful. She looks out the window for a few seconds and says nothing. A smile appears on her face, and she says that having her own castle would be great. Ash smiles and says that he is going to build a luxury hotel in Crossroad. This, of course, is not a castle, but it's also not bad. So he will provide her with free housing. He is obligated to take care of his people. Jupiter says she will be happy to camp there. Does this mean that she will be the first VIP there? Ash says that of course this is not true. He will be the #1 VIP. She will only get #2. But her room will have a gorgeous view of the city, as well as free alcohol and cigars. Jupiter asks what more could a mercenary want. Imagining whiskey and cigars in their empty hands, they laughed and discussed how they would spend time in a hotel that did not even exist yet. Maybe it was just a mirage, a dream into which mercenaries plunge day after day. But rather, the point is that they are just people. Ash gets up and says that in any case, she still has time before the next battle. She should rest well and focus on her recovery. Jupiter says she will do as His Highness orders. He is about to leave, but she stops him by asking him to tell her something. She asks, didn't he come to visit her without a gift? Ash thinks he knew she would say that. After this, he visited Godhand and also met with Saint Margaret and left the infirmary. Jupiter's internal injuries are very serious, and she will need at least a month to recover. Margaret told him so. Ash, with a thoughtful expression, thinks that this is such a stupid loss of an SR rank mage. In fact, it turns out that Jupiter received a suspension for the entire season. But that doesn't mean he can't use it. At later stages if she is diligent in her recovery. But it definitely cannot be used at the 5th, most difficult stage. She will also have to miss the operation to capture the base camp. Will he be able to carry out these fights without his most powerful magician? He goes outside and thinks that no matter how worried he is, it won't change anything. He can't do anything about it. He says it's time to encourage new guys to join their gang. Lucas says that he is at his service. Ash thinks that he can only hope that the mercenary guild will find a suitable candidate. They both come to the mercenary guild and stand in front of the entrance to the building. Ash closes his eyes, sighs, and says that he hopes he gets lucky. He kicks and opens the door and goes inside. He notices a girl wearing a big hat and thinks that this can't be true. Is this a golden glow? Is there really an SSR rank character here? He runs very quickly to this girl and thinks that he doesn't care about his dignity and reputation, because now is not the time for this. He asks loudly with a worried expression on his face, is she a mercenary? The girl was a little surprised that he suddenly approached her and looked at him silently for several seconds. She looks at him with a smile, apologizes to His Highness, and says that, however, she is not a mercenary. Ash asks if she is not a mercenary. Then why is she in their guild? The girl says that she is looking for one person. She came because her grandmother lives here. But for some reason it doesn't show up. Ash remembers Jupiter and thinks that only one person comes to mind that fits that description. He asks what her grandmother's name is. The girl says her name is Jupiter. Ash asks what is her name. The girl with a smile on her face says that her name is Jupiter the Younger, named after her grandmother. He can call her Juju Young Jupiter for short. Ash thinks that Jupiter Minor is an addition to a person's name, indicating an inherited name. In the system window, it is written that she is a guest SSR of rank 30. No rank, specialization mid-level elementalist. Intelligence and mana 25 points, agility 12 points, strength 10 points, endurance 8 points. Ash thinks that he has never met this character in the game, but she does have an SSR rank. She is probably really Jupiter's granddaughter. She even inherited the gold rush. By the way, she is also an elementalist. In simple words, an elementalist is a class of wizards who can control all elements at once. Of course, they manage some elements better and some worse. But these are high magicians who can cope with any situation. Ash says Jupiter hasn't told her much about her. Juju asks how. It turns out that Grandma didn't mention her. He thinks he remembers Jupiter talking about her granddaughter a couple of times. But she never mentioned that she was SSR rank. Although it is unlikely that Jupiter ever saw her rank. Juju says it's quite offensive. How can you not brag about such a cute granddaughter? So, what kind of person is standing in front of her? He is clearly a member of the nobility. Since he knew her name, could she ask him to introduce himself? Ash says of course she can. His name is Ash Bonhatter Everblack. He is currently the Lord of the Frontline Monsters. Juju immediately stood up, bowed and told His Highness that she apologized for not recognizing him right away. She never would have thought that she could meet him in a place like this. Her insolence is unforgivable, but she hopes that he will accept her apology. Ash says that she doesn't have to worry about it, because it's natural that she didn't recognize him. She can raise her head. He will be frank with her. What does she think about taking over under his command? Juju asks what does he mean. Ash says that the front line is in dire need of talented wizards like her. Since she's already here, how about lending a helping hand? He gives a guarantee that she will be paid well. Of all possible rewards that a magician can receive on any front or continent, she will get the best one. Juju tells His Highness that she is grateful for the generous offer. Ash hopes that she won't refuse. She says that the purpose of her visit is to meet her grandmother. He asks, so she came here to see Jupiter. Juju agrees and asks if she can think about his proposal after she meets her grandmother. Ash says that of course she can. He will wait for her decision. Juju asks, so he doesn't happen to know where she is now. He says that Jupiter is currently undergoing treatment in the infirmary. She was recently injured. Juju is silent for a few seconds and says that means she should look for her in the infirmary. She is grateful to His Highness. Ash waves at her and says that he wishes them a pleasant meeting. She should definitely think carefully about his proposal. Juju stops at the exit of the mercenary guild and agrees with him with a kind smile. She goes out, closes the door behind her, and Lucas says that this is quite interesting. Ash asks what does he mean. He says that she is the granddaughter of Jupiter. She doesn't look like her grandmother at all. Only in behavior there is barely any similarity. Ash thinks that they definitely didn't look alike, but they did have a similar aura. How can I explain this? It's as if the same thing emanates from them. Is it the smell of money? It seems they are both not rich. It seems like they really are related. Lucas quietly says that this is not the most interesting part. He wants to apologize in advance for the pun, but the fact that Jupiter has a child is simply shocking. Ash says he knows what he's talking about because he's surprised too. When she talked about her granddaughter, he thought it was a joke. Lucas coughs with a slightly embarrassed expression and says that, however, gossiping is not nice. Jupiter looks like he leads a rather bachelor's life. The news that she has a child and a granddaughter puts her into a stupor. Ash says he's right about that. Lucas says he wonders who her husband is. Ash says that he would also like to know, but it's strange to ask about such a thing, because it's personal. He hopes that Jupiter will be glad to see his granddaughter. At the same time in the infirmary, Jupiter's hands are shaking very much due to the injuries she received in the last battle. She looks out the window and thinks that the end is near. She understood that her life was coming to an end. As a soldier, mercenary, or magician, it's high time for her to retire. She tried to work a little more and took on any dirty work. She tried her best to earn every gold coin. But after many years of service in the army, she was still dishonorably discharged. She was even excluded from the mercenary reconnaissance group. Again and again, she was driven away from everywhere, so that she lived the life of a tramp for the most part. She never stayed on any front line for more than 3 months. Looking back, she realized that she did not feel in her place anywhere. But those days are coming to an end. Jupiter remembers what happened to her and wonders, can she rest now? Did she deserve the right to rest? Suddenly the door to her room opens and Juju loudly asks if she can guess who came to her. She loudly calls her grandmother and asks, "So where has she been?" She had already searched her. Jupiter was very surprised by this and loudly asked what she was doing here. Juju goes to her and says that she has not been in touch for a long time, so she decided to find her. She had no idea that she would be stuck in such a remote area for so long. She sits on the edge of the bed and asks with a smile, isn't she happy to see her granddaughter? What's wrong with her face? It was as if she had seen death. Jupiter can't say anything and Juju asks why she froze. Does she really think that she will eat her? To be honest, it was. Jupiter was very afraid that a child with the same name as hers would someday swallow her up. Juju extends her hand and says she needs money. Jupiter does not understand what she means, but she grinned and asked why she thought she went to such a distance. She tells her grandmother with a very sly smile that she must give her money immediately. Juju took the gold coin certificate and asks, is that all she has? They actually need to feed several people. Jupiter apologizes and says that she was injured and lay unconscious for several days. Juju asks, aren't there other ways to make money at the front? Jupiter asks what does she mean when she says this. Juju opens her box and says that it's the same way as when she worked for the Imperial Army. She did a lot of things back then. She turns to her and tells her grandmother that she is a master at such things. Does she really have nothing at all? Jupiter looks at her and says nothing for several seconds. She thought and said that she should not underestimate the local people. They keep order here very strictly. Even the walls have eyes, so there aren't many options here. First of all, the commander-in-chief, the third prince, its metropolitan reputation does not correspond to reality. He's not just an ordinary strategist. Sometimes it feels like he can see the future. Juju looks at her with a sly expression and asks, even so. This is the first time she has heard her admire the commander so much. Jupiter says he is like a man who has a lot of tricks up his sleeve. It will be much more profitable to earn honestly than to be caught for dubious actions. Besides, he pays well. Juju closes her locker and says that then I think she should also stay here and do some work. She is going to meet her prince, because he recently offered her a job. Jupiter, with a very worried expression on his face, says loudly that she shouldn't do this. She promised that she would not use magic. Juju laughs and asks why is she so worried. She straightens her hair and shows the part of her face that was damaged due to magic and asks if she is just now starting to worry about it. Jupiter was very surprised by what she saw and could not say anything. Juju tells Grandma that she should gain strength because she looks shabby. Jupiter, with a worried expression on his face, loudly says that she must wait because she did not finish. Juju tells Grandma that she has been doing dirty work all her life to earn money. She turns around and says with a sly smile that it's her turn. She leaves the room and closes the door, and Jupiter continues to lie on the bed and silently looks at the door. She again remembers the burning city and with a slightly angry expression on her face says that it is her fault. All this is because of her karma. At the end of the working day on the way to the estate, Ash is riding in a carriage driven by Lucas, looking at the system window, which says that autonomous reconnaissance is complete. He looks at it in surprise and asks, has 8 hours already passed? He sees in the system window that the entire sub-squad has increased their level and thinks that it was very simple. The system notifies that the items received are 2 simple potions, 12 small blood gems, and 1 scroll of flame enchantment. Ash looks at this and thinks that there are no casualties, and it looks like the trip went well without any consequences. He is surprised when he notices something that catches his attention. He thinks, did he imagine? His attention is attracted by small gems, and he asks loudly, what does this mean? Lucas is embarrassed by this and loudly asks my lord if he is okay. Something happened. Ash, with a very surprised expression on his face, looks at the system window and wonders. It turns out that the enemies of the 5th wave drop blood gems. This item drops from vampires or their minions who are related to them by blood. These are monsters of the highest level and appear only in the later stages of the games. What kind of failure is this? Why will they appear already on the 5th wave? Is this another dark event, or is the game outright mocking? Lucas opens the door and, with a worried expression on his face, asks His Highness if he is okay. Did he get another migraine? Ash tells him that he is fine. They should go to the mansion soon. He thinks that if he is right, and the next battle will be against vampires. Is it even possible to win with their current lineup? This is completely impossible. They need more strength. A lot more soldiers, high-ranking characters, and equipment are needed. He notices Juju walking down the street and loudly tells Lucas that he must stop the cart. He immediately agrees and the carriage stops next to her. Ash opens the door and calls out to her loudly. He gets out of the carriage and says loudly that he has only 2 options for her. Either she voluntarily comes under his command, or she will be forcibly summoned. What will she choose? Juju looks at him silently for a few seconds and thinks about it. She asks His Highness with a kind smile if he will give her a lift. Ash says she can sit. After she got into the carriage, Lucas immediately drove the carriage further. They continue to drive towards the estate, and Ash thinks that as he approached the mansion, shrouded in twilight, he already understood that hell awaited them. Hellish complexity, it's not just a name. It will be a real hell. Someone remembers Ash calling for the rat catcher with an angry expression on his face. Suddenly, Crown wakes up with a very surprised expression on his face. He sits in the main square, where no one was. He tries to catch his breath after this nightmare and says that it looks like he fell asleep. He thinks he doesn't even remember the last time he slept properly. I wonder since when did he start wearing those ridiculous clothes and acting like a clown. He no longer remembers this. So they call him the Pied Piper. In the kingdom under the lake, there was a fable with that name. In one village there were rats, and the villagers hired a bard to exterminate them. The bard, playing his flute, led the rats and drowned them all in the lake. But the villagers became greedy and did not pay the bard what they promised. The angry bard began playing the flute again and took all the children from this village into the lake. This seems true and too much like him. An unknown person approaches him and calls him by name. Crown turns around, sees a man in a mask, and asks what's wrong. The masked man says that there will be a meeting of all the Demon King's commanders soon. It looks like there will be an audience with the king today. Crown looks at this man with a tired look and asks, will there be an audience with the king? The masked man asks if he is going to attend. Crown slowly gets up and says that he will have to be there. He raises his head and says that after all, he is the representative of the kingdom under the lake. Despite the fact that the kingdom was colonized by demons and fell into decay. After that, he leaves in the direction he needs, and the masked man bows to him and says that he should be careful. Crown turns around and says that if he is not careful he will die, but change is also good. Some time later, he comes to the castle and walks along a long corridor, and many monsters look at him and stand in their places. Crown continues to walk towards the huge door and does not pay attention to the fact that the monsters around him say that he is a real clown. An idiot who knows no shame. He opens the huge doors and goes inside this office. Several people are sitting at a huge and very long table waiting for him. One of the monsters hits the table very hard with his huge hand and loudly says that he is late. How dare this insignificant mortal be late for a meeting organized by the Demon King himself? Are they really not familiar with the feeling of shame? Crown takes his seat and asks, did he call him an insignificant mortal? And this is what he is told by the one who was born from the nightmares of those very mortals. This is very funny. The monster asks this arrogant freak, what did he say? A monster with dark hands who plays chess says they have to stop. Their jester crown is in his repertoire. It is his task to mock, laugh, and amuse the people. That is his profession. Besides, there is some truth in his words. They are all collected and created from pieces of people's nightmares. However, it is precisely because people see eternal nightmares that they may well become reality. The king uses a very strong pressing aura on Crown and asks if he is right. He tries to resist this pressure and says that he said everything correctly. The king releases a very dark and strong aura and says that he must not forget about it. All the people of the kingdom under the lake are livestock needed by their army. Supplying the nightmares they require, they are no different from the cows and pigs they raised. He should be grateful that a man like him is allowed to sit at the negotiating table. Did he understand it? Crown, who is being pressed against the table with very strong pressure, says that this is undoubtedly so. He thinks that there is nothing shameful in submitting to the power of the strongest. For so many years he has experienced a variety of humiliations. This is nothing for him. The king says that's good, then they can get to the point. As they know, he called them here because the time has come for a big invasion. So one of them must lead an army and invade the human world. Since this is only the initial stage, they will lead the ghouls. The guy holding a glass of red drink in one hand tells the Lord that he should let him go. A wide smile appears on the king's face, and he is about to say something. He looks at the monster who said this. It was the commander of the 5th rank Nightmare Division. Immortal King Nosferatu Dracula. Seledian. The king says that he is surprised that he decided to propose his candidacy. He didn't want to interfere, didn't he? Seledian remembers what happened in training and says that people killed the Spider Queen. His eyes glow slightly red and he says that he wants revenge. So he asks to be allowed to do so. Olip, this is the Black Queen of Spiders. She was a powerful commander, occupying 6th place in rank, when she suddenly died from a shot from an ordinary cannon. And this happened during an intelligence operation. It was an absurd and sudden death. No one could have foreseen such an outcome. One of the monsters at this meeting says that they killed Olip. How dare this filthy brute do this? If it weren't for the Nameless One, these freaks would already be dead. The king spreads his hands and says with a smile that they don't need to strain so much. Anyway, she will come to life again later. Seledian and Crown look at him in silence with slight confusion, and the king says that of course they are not familiar with this concept. This suits him in principle. It will be extremely entertaining. He gives his permission to Seledian. The invasion will begin in 4 weeks, ground time. He bows to the king and says that he will do everything in the best possible way. The king says it's great that they sorted it out. Next, the problem of supplying mosquitoes to the entire kingdom. A monster comes to them and tells His Highness that he must allow him to report. The king asks him what's the matter. The monster says that the Nameless One has entered the palace. Crown was surprised by what he heard and looks at this monster in surprise. The king asks if he is sure of this. The monster says that he is absolutely sure of it. The king says that this was quite expected. The monster who stands at the entrance says that then, this meeting is over. It seems they had better lock the gates of the kingdom today. After he said this, Mumyon cut this monster into 2 parts with a wave of energy. All the monsters who were sitting at the table look at her and loudly say that this wicked one even snuck into the castle. Mumyon enters the office in which this meeting is taking place and says good evening to the monsters. The king looks at her with a smile and asks the Nameless One, is she still tired of this meaningless fight? Mumyon walks towards him with a sword with blood flowing through it and says that this is her fate. Clean again and again. It's her job to clean out the dust. This may sound strange, but she came to kill them. The king continues to smile and asks how many years have passed since she learned to wield this sword. Was it 100, 500, or maybe about 1,000 years ago? Mumyon says that she doesn't know this because she forgot about it a long time ago. The king says that no matter how hard she tries, she will never be able to save the kingdom. She will wander through this hell for eternity. Mumyon channels his white energy into the blade of his sword and it emits a bright light. She says with a calm expression that she doesn't mind fighting for ages. If this is her mission, then she will definitely accomplish it. Crown begins to slowly rise from his seat. He gets up and slowly walks towards her. He calmly walks past her, and Mumyon doesn't pay attention to him. The king opens his mouth wide, laughs loudly, and says that he is a broken one and one who will never submit. He's happy with what's happening because it's great nightmare material. Crown says there is no point in resisting because the nightmare will never end. Mumyon continues to stand with a calm expression on his face and says that, however, someone must carry the light. The Nameless One always thought about those who fell while trying to illuminate the darkness of this kingdom with light. And those who are resisting right now, including Ash's squad. Mumyon continues to release his bright energy and says that the light attracts new seekers. She rushes to attack the monsters who are in this office and thinks that it is never known when the light will shine again. Crown leaves from there, and a very bright light is visible from the entrance behind him. The countless battles that took place in the hell of the kingdom below the lake were repeated over and over again. At the same time at the Crossroad Estate, all members of the subgroup stand in front of Ash, joyfully chanting the name of Angelina. He looks at it and thinks that when he returned to the estate, he found that the side detachment had already dealt with matters. Ash says loudly that they should all calm down. He realized that Evangelina was great and did a great job. Will it be better if they tell you what monsters they faced this time? They were surprised that he said this and looked at him. Evangelina says that he shouldn't be too surprised when he hears what she has to say. She also saw these monsters for the first time, this time a monster. After a short pause, with what she considers a frightening expression on her face, she says that they were ghouls. Ash immediately thinks that this is very bad. Ghouls are those ugly monsters that serve and obey vampires, aren't they? It has been confirmed that the Fifth Wave Legion will consist of monsters bound by the blood of vampires. Lucas looks at them with a calm expression on his face and asks what kind of ghouls these are. Evangelina grimaces and says that these are the same living dead. She tries to imitate these monsters and makes strange sounds. These ugly monsters jumped out at her right out of the darkness. To be honest, she was even a little scared because of this. Dion, with an inspired expression on his face, loudly says that this is not true. It was they who were petrified with fear, and she protected them. And she fought like a warrior from legends. Evangelina was very embarrassed and was glad that she was being praised and said that there was something like that. She laughs and says he should stop this. Dion is shaking out of fear and says that if it weren't for her, they would probably all be infected by now. He trembles just thinking about it. They further embarrass her by loudly saying that she is their savior. They start screaming her name, and Evangelina, with a very reddened expression on her face, laughs and says that they have to stop this. Ash thinks that at other times he would have laughed with them and also joked somehow, but today he didn't want to joke. He asks, so there are monsters with blood bonds. They're talking about vampires, aren't they? Like from a fairy tale? He thinks that among the huge variety of cursed monsters in this game, he comes across rare and incredibly terrible monsters. Evangelina thinks about it and says that she knows that ghouls are monsters related by blood. Wait, he wants to say that this time it will be. She doesn't have time to finish because Ash has already understood what she wants to ask, agrees and says that they understood everything correctly. The next enemy will be an army of vampires. It will be vampires and their minions. And, most likely, they will be led by a high-ranking clan member. A vampire lord, no less. Lucas asks His Highness. However, if he is not mistaken, high-ranking individuals have never entered the battlefield, right? Besides, hundreds of years have passed since vampires were last seen. The ghouls they discovered this time are most likely part of a vampire clan. But maybe he is worrying about this high-ranking vampire in vain. Ash thinks that normally this would be the case, but this will be boss level. In addition, he cannot shake the feeling that the mysterious evil will only increase the difficulty of each subsequent level. Therefore, a being of the highest rank will surely appear. It wasn't just a guess. He was sure of it. When he played the game, he happened to encounter all the prominent vampires belonging to the clan. Each of their raids was bloody, merciless, and terrible. However, the most terrible case was the case of the Bloody Lord, the Immortal King. When Celendian himself enters the battle in person, Although it is unlikely that the head of the clan will enter the battlefield at the 5th stage, which is considered the initial stage. The difficulty of the level is already off the scale, so it would be better to prepare for the worst. So at the 5th stage, there will be a raid with Celendian. This is so absurd that it's just funny to him. But it's not impossible, is it? Ash remains silent with a serious expression on his face and thinks that he should stop, because this is not the first time he has thought about this. He thinks with a determined look on his face that he can get through this. That's what he's here for. Evangelina tells my lord that she has a question. Ash says she can ask. She points to Juju, who is sitting in the corner of the room and looking for something in a drawer, and asks who is it next to him. She sees her for the first time. Ash turns to her and says that he didn't introduce them to each other. At this time, she quickly hides something behind her robe, and he says with a smile that they should meet. This is their new elemental magician, the granddaughter of Mrs. Jupiter. Jupiter Minor. She will join the main group as an attack mage. She turns to them after being introduced, waves, says her name, and says it's nice to meet them. They may call her Juju or just the younger one. Evangelina, with a very joyful expression on her face, asks if she can call her sister Juju. Ash looks at this and thinks that she is clearly very happy that she will have an older colleague who can be called a sister. After exchanging pleasantries, he sent out a reconnaissance party. He can't keep them here forever. Evangeline, before leaving, waves her hand and says goodbye to her sister. Juju also waves his hand at her and says that they will definitely meet again. She should rest well. Dion loudly says that they should celebrate their successful mission. Evangelina asks if she can go with them. He says that of course she can. Ash is silent for a few seconds, sitting in his chair, and thinks that he is lucky that they found a common language and became friends. Although at first they behaved timidly. Juju smiles and says they are all very nice. He heard that the front line of monsters is a vicious place. It's a little surprising to see this here. Ash looks at her with a smile and says that although the war with monsters seems like hell, it is better to live the moments of respite as vividly as possible. Or does she prefer quieter places? Juju adjusts his hat and says with a smile that that's not the point. It's just that she's seen a lot. The same young and sweet guys who are gradually losing their smile and passion. War takes lives, takes away property, and it is so sad that even the survivors lose the desire to rejoice. This is very sad. Ash thinks he was able to picture it in his head right away. Wave after wave of monster invasions, one after another, wears them down. And the people on this front, who are still laughing and talking, will turn into a bunch of lifeless and emaciated dolls. Ash turns to her and says it's time she told her about her skills. Juju says she will gladly do it. He thinks that Jupiter is the youngest, a character that he has not yet met in the original game. He looks at the stats window with her skills and thinks that he has a rough idea of her abilities and characteristics, but it will be better if she herself tells more about everything. Juju extends her hand and says she is an elementalist. She can work with most elemental elements, and among them there are 3 that she masters perfectly. She creates several magical elements over her hand at the same time and says that they are water, air, and lightning. Ash looks at it and thinks that the lightning is the same as her grandmother's. Juju says with a smile that she is offended, but her achievements so far are small. The only thing she can do in terms of magic is fire in volleys. Ash looks at her with a calm expression and thinks that it looks like she is talking about the first skill, Elemental Explosion. The whole point of this skill is to just hit with an element. Juju channels the energy into her fist and says that she feels like if she practices a little more, she can figure out other ways to use it. That's all. It's just a modest talent. She's even embarrassed to show it off. Ash says modesty is good. He thinks that being an elementalist with 3 elements is already impressive. He gets up from his chair and says that then, they should discuss her weekly salary. Juju says with a sly smile that she knows that her grandmother's annual salary was paid in advance. Can she do the same? Ash walks around his office and says that his financial situation is not the best right now. He sits down on another table and says that in general, first she must prove her usefulness. The money will come later. He smiles and says that he knows that she has abilities that she is keeping silent about. He thinks that one of the features of Jupiter Minor is a foxhole. With this, she can reduce and hide her characteristics. The system notifies that there is a foxhole. This is a fallback option, providing the opponent with false information about skills in order to have at least some trump card up his sleeves. Ash thinks that characters with such skills caused a lot of trouble for players because it was impossible to know their exact characteristics. He says that she should tell him about all her hidden abilities. Juju was embarrassed by this and looked at him silently for several seconds. Ash pats the table on which she is sitting and says that only then will they be able to discuss more favorable terms of cooperation for her. Juju, how did he know that she was hiding her skills? Not a single magician, not even her grandmother, noticed this. Ash says he has a good sense of things like this. He looks away at the system window and thinks that there must be at least some benefit from the system in order for this incredibly difficult game to be completed at all. He says that she should tell him about her hidden abilities, and then he can reward her what she deserves. Isn't it money that interests her most? Sometime later, a system window with Juju's real skills appeared in front of Ash, and he thinks that, as it turned out, her true statistics look like this. In fact, she reached level 35 after completing the second stage of development and even gained a second active skill. Why did she want to hide it? He looks at how Juju writes on a piece of paper and thinks that it seems that she is still hiding something. But if she's putting so much effort into keeping the secret, it might be easier to just leave it as is. Juju finishes writing and says that during the probationary period, payment will be made weekly, and at the end of the month of the probationary period, payment will be made immediately for the next 11 months. She raises her head with a smile and asks His Highness, did she understand everything correctly? Ash says that's right. He smiles at her and thinks that she is eerily similar to her grandmother, because her eyes also light up when the conversation turns to money. They will do their best, but seek the best terms at the time of contract. Something about hiring magicians is extremely expensive for him. He says the contract is concluded. He knows it's a little late, but he still has a question. Juju asks, what is this question? Ash calls her name and asks if she has ever used magic against a person. She thinks about it and tells His Highness that she is not sure that she understood his question. Ash says he's not trying to dredge up her past. It's just that although this is the forefront of monsters, their next opponents will be people. That's why he decided to ask it. He thinks that the closest opponents are a Nightcrawler squad that has occupied the base camp. They will have to participate in PvP against the same squad of people. Just in case, he decided to ask the new magician how she felt about having to use magic against people. Juju says that's what she's saying, that she doesn't understand the question. Isn't magic made to be used against people? Ash was very surprised by this and looks at him in disbelief. Juju says swords, spears, bows, and the like. All these weapons were created by people to repel the same people in the end. He wonders if she has ever used magic against people. Of course it is. This is natural. This is why magic was invented. The first task on the front line of monsters is to kill people. A small smile appears on her face, and she says that it's a little ironic, but to be honest, she's confident. Ash thinks he suddenly realized something. How different this world is from the one he lived in. This world is extremely harsh, full of wars and deaths. This is not land at all. He silently looks down with a thoughtful expression on his face and thinks that he still remembers the eyes of a frightened child who could not bring himself to shoot at a man. That's why he is still puzzled by such questions. Even in this world, not all people will be happy that someone needs to be killed. Only they will still have to do it if necessary. To protect people and find out the true ending. If there is no other way out, he will even have to kill his own kind. Killing is rarely a free choice. Rather, it is an inevitability when nothing else remains. Sometime later, Ash briefly told Juju about the strength of the Nightcrawler squad. He says she should be careful. It was their magicians who wounded her grandmother. She says she is very sorry. Because of her anger, small lightning bolts appear in her eyes, and she says that if she had been there, they would all have come to an end. She tells His Highness with a calm expression and a smile that he need not worry. They will get it in full. She will definitely avenge her grandmother. Ash smiles at what she said and says he hopes so. He thinks it is not because she is an SSR rank mage, but because she is Jupiter's granddaughter. That's why he believes her. The next day, the third free exploration zone, the northern wall of the castle. The re-exploration of the third zone was carried out for several reasons, the first of which was to test Juju's skills. She handled it flawlessly. Ash stands nearby, looks at these monsters, and thinks it's disgusting. So this is what it's like to be in a zombie apocalypse. Juju, who easily dealt with a large group of monsters, turns around and asks His Highness with a smile, what will he say? Surely this is enough to confirm her skills. Ash says that's more than enough. This is a very good result for a battle mage. He thinks that she is slightly inferior in destructive power to her grandmother, but she has an adjustable range of attacks, and she also has a variety of attributes. Looks like he pulled a lucky ticket. He goes further and thinks that he can consider that he has completed the first task. He approaches the bodies of the killed monsters and thinks that the second task is to determine the type of ghouls. The characteristics of these monsters depend greatly on who their lord is. These monsters clearly have the frost attribute. Among the vampire lords, only one has such abilities. And this is Celendian. There can be no mistake. It looks like the vampire lord himself will come to their city. Ash silently looks at the bodies of the ghouls and thinks that knowing the enemy by sight in advance is better than nothing. They all stand together in front of the bodies of the killed ghouls and Bodybag flies to them, calling for my lord. She comes down and says that they are almost done exploring the area. Ash looks at her and asks how she thinks this task will actually be accomplished. Bodybag stands on the ground next to him, agrees and says that it seems to her that everything is quite doable. Ash smiles and says that's great news. He thinks that in this way all 3 assigned tasks were completed during free exploration. He claps to get attention and says that they all did great and they should go back. They all walk along the wall together, and he thinks that since the main camp cannot be used yet, it is necessary to return to the entrance to Area 3 and retreat. Ash stops at the edge of the wall, silently looks down and thinks that the main camp, which the enemies have occupied, is hidden in the alley behind this square. There is a squad of nightcrawlers and a rat catcher named Crown. He must wait a little. Very soon he will return and retake the camp from him. His attack will be much worse than when they attacked them. Ash approaches the portal, which he immediately activates and says that it is time for them to return home. They take turns passing through this portal, and the joyful Evangelina loudly tells the team that they can have a drink after this. Ash says he won't go because he has something to do. She asks loudly, how is it? He must go with them. Juju remained in the castle under the lake and stands at the entrance to the portal for a few more seconds, while everyone else has already returned. She brings her hand to her face and begins coughing loudly into her palm. She removes her hand from her face and notices the blood she coughed up, but says nothing. She tightly squeezes her hand, stained with blood, and looks at her fist with a sad expression on her face. Having thought all this over, she passes through the portal and is transported back to the surface. The system notifies that free research has been completed and he has received a reward. Lucas, Juju, and Damien from the main squad have leveled up. Additional squad members Skull, Old Girl, and Burnout have also leveled up. 5 days later, near the alchemist's workshop, Godhand looks at his new hand made of metal and controls it. Juju looks at it and says it looks pretty good. Ash says he agrees with her. Looks just like the real thing. Godhand looks at the new hands with a happy expression and says he likes it. It's much better than his old prosthesis. Much lighter and more convenient to use. Lily says of course it is. It is the most expensive metal of all, which can only be made in this workshop. Godhand smiles happily at her and says that he is very grateful to her. He is about to take something out of his pocket and asks what the price of the prosthesis is. Lily says that he can keep the money for himself, because the price is her life. She asks with a confused expression if he really thinks she would take money for it. She just doesn't like to stay in debt. Godhand wants to tell her something, but Lily doesn't listen, closes the door behind him and loudly says that he should take this and leave. She still has a lot of work that she needs to do by order of His Highness. Ash silently looks on from the side and says that they are acting quite cute. Godhand then puts gloves on his new hands. He turns around, gives a military salute, and tells His Highness that he is completely healed and ready to return to work. Ash says that's great news. He thinks that he has put on gloves and is now no different from his former self. But still he lost his arm below the elbow. He would like to give him more time to rest. But they're on a tight schedule, so he can't help it. They need to move on. For example says that he is waiting for them at the mansion until 9 o'clock in the evening. He must bring all the members of the Shadow Squad. They'll leave tonight. The operation will take place at night, so everyone should go to bed early to get enough sleep. Godhand says he will do everything. After that, he leaves, and Ash looks at him and thinks that he took one last look in the direction of the alchemy workshop, and then went towards the infirmary. After that, Lily, as a senior magician, greeted Juju and gave her parting words. She took Juju by the hand, said her abbreviated name and wanted to say something, but paused. Tears began to flow down her face, and she says with a joyful smile that if His Highness offends her, then she must definitely say it. She will definitely support her. The magicians have to stick together, right? Juju laughed at this and said that of course it is. They must support each other. Ash looks at them and thinks that it looks like he should create a mage guild for them to have fun there. Lily turns to him, calls him His Highness, and pauses again. With a serious expression on her face, she says that if necessary, he can always call her to the front line. She's ready for it. Ash was a little surprised by this and agreed. He wonders, can he call her if necessary? He had told her that this time it was the vampire lord himself who was opposing them. Lily went back to her business with an upset expression on her face, and Ash looks at her with a small smile and thinks that it's too early for her to retire. He turns around and says that it's time for them to leave. He says with a serious expression and a smile that they need to prepare for an attack. He thinks that all members of the squad were called to the estate. The time has finally come for the operation to recapture the main camp. They all go to the estate together, and Ash says that first they must enter the estate and discuss the details of the plan. They stop when they notice Jupiter standing at the entrance to the estate. He says that she has not yet fully recovered. She needs to rest, so what is she doing here? Jupiter, with a serious expression on her face, tells His Highness that she heard that they were leaving on a new mission today. She asks to take her with her. Ash looks at her with a surprised expression and asks what did she say. He and Jupiter look at Juju, and she says that in return for this, she asks to leave her granddaughter here. She starts walking towards them with shaking legs and says that these freaks are the reason she is in this state now. He should let her take revenge. Jupiter approaches him and immediately grabs him tightly by the cloak. She leans a little towards him and tells His Highness that she asks him to do this, because this child should not fight. Juju comes up to them, takes Grandma by the free hand, and says that she can't even stand. Is she really going to explore the dungeon in this state? Jupiter looks at her with a serious and worried expression on his face and asks the youngest, maybe they should stop before it's too late? She tried so hard, worked so much so that she wouldn't have to be in her place. She knows it herself. That is why, up until today, she has not led the most honest life. Juju removes her hand from Ash's cloak and calls her Grandma. She looks at her with a slightly sad smile and says that she has already concluded a mercenary contract and today is the day of the first operation. Jupiter was very shocked by what she said and looks at her with a very frightened look. Juju asks Grandma why she decided to make a fuss here. It puts them both in an awkward position. It would be better if she took her to the infirmary so she could rest, and later they would discuss everything. Jupiter asks His Highness in a very serious voice, if she is in perfect order and turns out to be stronger than her granddaughter, will he take her instead of Juju? Ash was surprised by this, was silent for a few seconds, and asked what she wanted to say. Jupiter looks at him and says loudly that she is requesting a duel. Ash is surprised by this and asks what did she say. She stands opposite Juju. For several seconds they stand in silence, and only the sound of the wind can be heard. Lucas moves away from them and tells my lord that he should move away. Ash is very surprised by what is happening and thinks that he should wait. Instead of hiding, you need to stop them, right? Juju asks with a serious expression on her face. Did she need to meddle in her affairs? Jupiter, breathing heavily because she is still in a bad state, agrees and says that she needed to do this. She's not ready to leave yet. If she is stronger, then there is no point in her staying here. The main thing for a mercenary is skill. Skill is the only thing that matters. Juju considers what she says and takes a deep breath. She spins her wheelhouse in her hand and says that she will do as she says. She points the phone at her grandmother and asks if it's time to demonstrate what she inherited from her. Jupiter directs the lightning into his hands and tells his granddaughter that she shouldn't say anything stupid. Her talent is exceptional. But will it surpass the experience gained over so many years of service? She looks at her with a serious expression on her face, points her hand in her direction, and releases a bright yellow lightning bolt. Juju also starts using lightning magic and looks at her and says that she seems to have aged a lot. She releases blue lightning and their very powerful spells collide in the middle. Their lightning collides with each other, begins to move unpredictably and causes damage along the way. Their lightning is directed towards the tree and destroys it, causing Ash to become very worried and loudly say that this is his garden. He thinks they should go and sort things out elsewhere. This duel ended quite quickly and Jupiter lost in this battle. She fell to her knees. The blood that flowed down her face falls to the floor next to her feet, and she asks the youngest, "Isn't this enough?" She looks at her with a sad expression and asks if she can't stop taking revenge on her. Juju silently looks at her for several seconds with a sad expression on his face and tells his grandmother that this is hardly possible. She passes by her grandmother and says that she should go back to the infirmary and rest. She will come back so quickly that she won't even have time to get bored. Ash helps Jupiter up and asks if she is okay. She gets up with his help and tells His Highness that she asks him to take care of her granddaughter. After that, she leaves towards the city, and Ash looks at her and thinks that despite her condition, she was ready to do anything to prevent her granddaughter from going on an expedition. What happened between them? He didn't know, and he didn't have time to find out, because they needed to go on reconnaissance, according to the plan. He turns around and says that it's time for them to go, because it seems that everyone is already assembled. Lucas agrees with him and follows him. Sometime later at the estate, Ash stands in front of his 3 squads and thinks that despite the slight commotion, all 3 squads came together as planned. There were members of the main squad here, including himself, a shadow squad led by Godhand, and a mercenary squad captained by Dian. In total, there are 15 of them here. Ash says that he would like to talk about their strategy to gain control of the main camp. He thinks this will be a record number of people traveling to the kingdom under the lake at one time. Sometime later, in the backyard of the Lord's estate, Ash says that Evangelina will go inside first, and Lucas will follow her. They both look at him and agree to it. Ash says that Juju will come next. Her task is magical protection. She must prepare the spell and go inside. She says with a serious expression that he can rely on her. Ash says he and Damien will follow them. He turned to him and asked if he had made his decision. He also looks at him and tells His Highness that he will shoot if he gives such an order. Ash says that he shouldn't overdo it, because he wouldn't want to ruin his beliefs. Damien says it's not because of beliefs. He is simply afraid that having shot a person just once, at that very moment something in him will change forever. Ash puts his hand on his shoulder and says that there is no need. With his skills, you can simply incapacitate them rather than kill them. He doesn't know what kind of sniper he will become in the future, but no matter what path he chooses, he is this team's trump card. He shouldn't forget about it. Damien feels better and agrees with His Highness with a serious expression on his face. Ash turns to the mercenary squad and loudly asks if they are ready. They all loudly agree with him, and he says that then they should go and get this over with quickly. Immediately after this, they all go through the portal together and say something loudly to each other. After all the troops passed through the portal, the magic immediately disappeared and the stones fell to the ground. The system notifies that loading is taking place, teleportation is taking place. Tip: dungeon NPCs have different relationships. Using this mechanic correctly is the shortest path to conquering dungeons. Ash and the others go through the portal, and they all prepare for battle and stand in front of the portal. They look around, but there is no one on this street, and only a small fire makes quiet sounds. Ash, with a serious expression on his face, looks around and wonders, is there really no one here? There's seriously no one here. Wait, this simply cannot be. Several people simultaneously point their weapons at them and make sounds that give them away. Ash notices these people who are targeting them and realizes that they are surrounded. He looks around with a calm expression on his face and thinks that this picture is familiar to him. Everything happens the same as last time. Crown comes out to them from a dark corridor and says that he doubted that they would dare to follow this path again. But they turned out to be unpredictable. He asks the player why he decided to risk his life and come here again. Ash says he should stop calling him a player because he has a name. He slaps his hand and says his name is Ash Bonhatter Everblack. Crown says that he has already heard this name somewhere. Ash says of course he heard that. Everblack, this is a great empire at the top, and he is the third prince of this empire. He can bend if his upbringing allows him to do so. Crown asks, is this the same little country in the middle of nowhere? Ash was surprised when he heard this and asks what did he say. Crown looks at his hand and asks how many years have passed above that the tiny country began to be called an empire. Every time something like this comes up, he feels like an old man. Ash thinks that more than 100 years have passed since the Everblack Empire conquered the continent. It is unquestionably the most powerful country, ruling half the world. And he calls it tiny. What does he have with the concept of time? Does he really mean to say that he is more than 100 years old? Crown looks at him with a scary look and asks, anyway, if he thinks they should stop this conversation. He raises his hand so that the men from his squad are ready to shoot and says that since they deigned to visit their base, he dares to assume that they are looking for a quick way to die. People who stand on the roof point the cannon in their direction and await orders. Ash, with a serious expression on his face, says that this is not at all true. This was not in his plan. At the same moment, Damien emerges from the portal behind him and immediately takes aim with his weapon, which has already been charged. He very quickly targets the cannon that was standing on the roof and destroys it with one shot. 3 mercenaries who came out of the portal after them run into the attack and shout loudly that they must attack now. Ash asks with a sly smile. Maybe he already realizes his situation. 2 other mercenaries come through the portal with a large artifact in their hands, and he says that he is doomed to lose his base and screw up. This artifact activates and begins to emit bright energy. With the help of an artifact, a magical barrier appears around them, and Ash says that enemies have already appeared at its base. This means they should give up and start running away from here.